going on, everyone? Welcome back to I Came with Fire podcast. Tonight we are on with Aaron Love. Aaron is back. He was a super big fan favorite last time. We got a ton of positive feedback about you being on here, man. Yeah, we're excited to have you back. I know this could be a great conversation. Zach is the first time talking to you, and I know he's excited too.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, dude. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. So what you been up to, man?
Same old, man. Just trying to maintain my bearing in this world of crazy stuff that's going on, and trying to dig my way down to the truth and try to figure out what's going on. And you know how it is. Like, you try to live locally and think globally and move on with your normal life, and try to, surround yourself with like-minded individuals and talk to your friends and not get too upset about things that you can't control. But I got to be honest with you, it's kind of tough in this crazy world. So here we are. So,
Absolutely, man.
Yeah.
And it definitely, I think it's no secret. I've said before that I live in California, and it's kind of hard to get past a lot of the stuff that happens out here, and then see just how much the broader scale of the United States tends to go kind of the same way of what happens in California and some of the thought processes out here. So it is really difficult. But
it's the same thing up here in New York State where I'm at. I'm on the upstate New York, and I would say they're pretty down to earth, understand how things go. But just like how Washington's controlled by Seattle and California is controlled by the cities, New York is controlled by New York City and its policies. So drive 4 hours away, and it's like your voice doesn't matter.
That's true. Yeah, man. So I just want to say real quick too, while we're on here, is when you and I talk sometimes, Aaron, you say these two words that I really like. You like to say "we continue," and I think that's one of the biggest things that I take away from talking to you and then doing episodes like this is that despite all the shit going on in our country, like, there's a message and there's ideals that we want to emulate and project and get out there to other people. And I think there's a lot of things clouding what the United States really stands for. And so the message that you're trying to push, I think, is a really, really good one. And it's one that we want to push as well, some of the other stuff that we want to talk about. But it really reminds me of that quote. It's the same quote that Mattis put out to the troops when he left his SecDef position. It's a Lincoln quote. And we continue makes me think of it. That quote is, let nothing which is transpiring change, hinder, or delay your military movements or plans, but just your plans, right? So with everything going on in the world, you're just steadfast in those beliefs, those things that you like to talk about. And that's really what draws me to you. And I think that's really what draws a lot of the people that have listened to us, and a lot of the positive comments that we got about you the last time. Those people tend to congregate towards those ideals as well. So expect more of Aaron on here, because we really enjoy that those ideals and everything. But yeah, man, I really like that. We continue. That would be a pretty sick t-shirt, honestly.
It's simple. Like, here's the thing that I've found out as I've gotten a little bit older, and for whatever wisdom I think I'm going to pass to people. Like, again, I'm not narcissistic enough to think that I know anything, but you know what? You have to be able to boil your things down, and it's a bumper sticker world, right? If I can't tell you what my ideals, what my culture, what my values, what my morals are, if I can't boil that down, like, we continue as a simple truth, man. Like, you can give me all the hate you want. I get death threats on my account. I get people that hit me up every single comment section. And if you look at my comment section, they're a dumpster fire.
Yeah.
And I try to do my best to, I don't make any bones about it. I'm not here for discourse. Discourse hasn't worked. Turning the other cheek, the constant, conservative or libertarian or sort of middle of the road is like, well, let's just bygones be bygones. And if you want to go do, that's why we can't, people can't answer that. That's why people can't say, hey, they can't call the government out for corruption when they see it, is because while we have been saying, okay, well, let's just let everybody do what they want, and I just want to be left alone, that doesn't work, man. Like, that's not a thing that works. I do not care. I'm not here for discourse. I'm here to provide a voice. I'm here to provide some backing. I'm here to provide some credibility to a movement that's important. And what that movement is that there are things that are important to the health of this country. There are things that are important to the well-being of the citizens of this country. And I'm going to continue. I am indefatigable in the way that I will approach these things. So when people text me and they're like, hey man, and I'll tell you what, I get 10 times more positive messages than I do negative messages.
That's good.
But it's like, hey, thank you for providing a voice. The message is, thank you for saying the things that I'm not allowed to say online. You know what? We're going to continue. We continue. We're going to keep going forward. And I'm not going to be stopped by silly little trolls in the comments. You're not going to hurt my feelings online. You're not going to make me feel bad about having morals and values and ethics and things that I hold dear, like the Constitution of the United States of America and who we are as Americans. So we're going to continue. And unless you can boil it down, unless you can make those things into a short little bite-sized piece for people in this world, you're not going to get your message across. So you know what? We continue.
I totally agree with you.
For sure.
And
I like the
go ahead, man.
Oh, thanks. I like the activism part to it, right? You said how you can't just kind of turn the cheek or just let it keep happening, because that's what got us here today. That's got, why we're where we're at, why we have a recession, why we have not strong leaders, all this type of stuff is because we just thought, oh, well, we'll be the nice guys. We'll be the
we're going to be professional. We're going to turn it. You know what? Exactly. Here's what I'll say is like, the turn the other cheek thing came from Jesus. And I try not to inject any specific religiosity because that's not what I'm about. That's a personal held belief for me. But you know what? Jesus turned the other cheek, and what happened to him? He was crucified by his government. That's what happened. So that's what happened to the last guy that was a perfect example of how to be a passive individual. And that's what happened. At least in the allegory and the story of that thing. So, that time is over. There's a bunch of other conservative voices out there that say, cutesy time is over and the time for live and let live, like that's over. We've lost that game. And for a long time, we have lost ground. The slippery slope is a very real thing, ladies and gentlemen. And we have lost a lot of ground on the slippery slope by just being like, okay, well, fine. Maybe we'll let you just have this concession and then this concession and then this concession. And then pretty soon you're like, wow, these rights and privileges that we were supposed to be endowed by a creator, they no longer exist. And it's because for so long people were silent. I'm okay not being silent. I enjoy conflict. I'm okay in chaos. So if that's what we need to do, then that's what we need to do. So let's start figuring out how it is that we play the game with the rules that are set out, and we go from there.
I totally agree.
Yeah,
with
the
you.
silent majority needs to be the active majority now. Like, you need to be loud and voice your concerns and your expressions. I also like how you say a lot how a lot of people can't have more than two ideas in their head. That's completely true. A lot of people I talk with, close friends and stuff, you try to have a conversation and they're just so ingrained in, well, I was told this thing by the person I follow, so I just have to keep repeating it. It's like, well, have you ever had a thought the other way? Like maybe from the other perspective, the other point of view? I try to live that way, always think it from both ends and then come to a decision. I don't want to be an echo chamber.
Absolutely, man. And I've tried to have conversations like that. We probably all have with like friends or family members, which can be dangerous ground, especially if you're family. But, you try to point out how somebody's unilaterally thinking about like one party or another or whatever. And you're just trying to point out like, those are two wings on the same bird. I get hit with a lot of whataboutism isn't an argument or whatever. And it's like, I'm not saying if this is okay, then that's okay. I'm not making concessions or excuses for one end or the other. I'm trying to tell you that at the end of the day, we've moved past the point where the government does not care about us. The government cares about extending itself, extending its life, asserting more control. That's what it cares about, not the American people anymore. And that's the point I'm trying to make and get people to understand is that, the time for party lines and all of this moving up to the threshold, and seeing what we can get away with and move back, all of this it's over. We've reached the point of no return. And it's hard to get that message across to people who can't just get out of that rut of, I'm a liberal or I'm a conservative or whatever.
Why not just be an American?
Exactly.
Yeah, saying that you have a party is like going to like saying I'm a liberal or and this is the thing that people, I mean, they constantly like, obviously I have a conservative bent, obviously, because I am I would be considered a classical liberal if that word actually meant what it was supposed to mean, right? Like the minimum amount of government, the maximum amount of individual freedom and liberty. You leave everybody else alone. What happens on your 40 acres does not happen on mine. And, you're good with it as long as you don't come over across my fence. Like, but that word has taken on such of a semantic overload and such of a semantic punch that I can't even use it anymore. So, you kind of say independent, but, in the vein of people can't have two ideas in their head at the same point. Like, I can sit here and I can say, I disagree with some of the policy decisions that are going on. I disagree with the entire progressive movement because I 100% do. But I'm also not a Trump guy. I'm also not a Republican. I also understand that there is hypocrisy on both sides of it, and people like to use the analogy. Well, it's two wings of the same bird. Okay, right, but you're begging the question. I don't want a bird. I don't want the bird
Right.
at all. Like, you're talking about the wrong animal. I'm trying to describe a lion, and you're telling me, well, you have to pick the one wing of these birds. No, we are fundamentally disagreeing on the very premise of the concept. That's the problem here. And when, great point when you say people can't hold two ideas in their head at the same time. And I say that all the time. Like, well, the whataboutism thing kills me too. You look at somebody and be like, oh, well, this guy just shot a guy. And then the other person goes, well, yeah, but you know a guy that shot a guy before. Like, okay, well, that may be true. But in this moment, we need to address the prescient problem, which is this guy is a murderer and we have to stop him from what he's doing.
And we don't
And
need to care
people
about
mess that
misgendering.
up. Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah. They never go like one step deeper. Like, they think like, aha, I got you. They just want to dunk on people in the internet. And you're like, no, that's not what we're talking about. Like, I get it. All politicians are corrupt. But I'm telling you, in this point, in this context, and in this time, these things that I'm talking about are important to stop, to call out, and to make sure they don't continue happening, or else we're going to repeat this process again. And people can't get past that because of their party alliances and their preconceived biases and a whole lot of other things. And it's frustrating, but you just have to rise above that. And you just have to and that's, again, I'll bring it back. Like, I get it. I get these conversations, but we continue. We're going to move forward because we have a goal. I'm not just here to be mad on the internet. I'm not here to argue with dorks that have no followers and no posts, and they just want to pop up and say mean things. That's not the point. We continue. We're going to make sure that America, this American experiment, continues into the future. And we got some problems, and we got to talk about them.
Exactly. And a lot of what you're talking about is people expecting the government to fix problems when they say, what about this? What about that? Like, we have to get to the point where we are fixing things on our own and not expect, big daddy government to step in and say, here's what's going on, because it's exactly what they're trying to do. And they are infringing completely on a lot of what makes us Americans and the ideals that we've upheld for centuries, So
Name one good thing that the government does. Name one thing that the government does better than private industry. I'll wait. Is it the DMV? Yeah, sure. Is it the DMV? Is it, is it the VA? Is it Veterans Healthcare? Is it like, name one thing that is run by the government that the government does better? And my good friend Dan Holloway, he says this better than I ever could, so I'll just steal it from him. But you know how you start figuring out how to make your life better? You find out what the government does. You find out a way on your own little tribe to do that better, and then you box the government out. If you look, the worst state's performance right now across the nation, and people use this metric all the time to be like, oh, look at the red states. If we had a national divorce, the red states would die on the vine. The red states do the worst as far as like poverty, as far as education, whatever. Guess who receives the most amount of government welfare across the board? All of those red states that they're mentioning. Yep. So they use that data to lie to you to say, oh, well, the red states, if you guys didn't have the government helping you out, you guys would die on the vine. Well, no, I can find correlation doesn't often equal causation, but I can tell you what, I can tell you one correlative fact. The places that the government gives the most help to are doing the worst right now. And that's a true thing. Like Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, a lot of these, southeastern states and southern states, they receive the most federal aid and they're doing the worst. And that's for a reason. There's a line to draw in there. And people mess that up all the time. So
almost by design.
Yeah, it's like what Reagan said. I'm here from the government and I'm here to help. The most terrifying words in the world.
9 most terrifying words that anybody has ever said. Hi, I'm here from the government and I'm here to help. Absolutely
Exactly.
not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the United States is having its own existential crisis, right? But there are a lot of other threats on the exterior. And when you got weakness within, it definitely brings the wolves from without. You know what I mean? So I know that there's a lot of things going on around the world that are threatening American way of life. The hegemony of the United States has enjoyed for a long time. And the biggest threat to that, in my opinion, nationally would be the Chinese. And I know that Zach, Aaron, you guys have some of the similar opinions, man. So they're on this 2049 plan timeline right now, doing a lot of work with the Belt and Road Initiative, doing a lot of work with BRICS. Seen just the other day, 19 other countries are looking to sign up. And a lot of these countries are pretty close to the United States geographically. And there are places like Mexico with things like lithium mines that we would really, like to tap into and should be working on doing, but we're not. So, I don't know, man. What do you guys think?
You want to hit it off, Aaron, or do you want me to jump in?
Yeah,
It's a big bite.
I have a lot of strong feelings on this. I want to start by saying, like, everybody's worried about the dollar collapsing and everybody's worried about getting off the dollar. Like, hey, I got it. 90%, 97% right now of the world reserves are still held in dollars. So when we start talking about changing over to the yuan, it's concerning that Saudi Arabia wants to get off the petrodollar and they want to start trading in yuan, and it's concerning that BRICS is happening, whatever. But when you actually, there was a bar graph for how much I should care about this, and it was equal to the bar graph of what this actually means to the US dollar on the world stage, they would both be about this, right? But that's not what we're concerned about here. The concern is that China has a 100-year plan that they've been enacting for the last 20 years-ish since the Great Leap Forward. The concern is that China has been manufacturing and essentially producing their own influence on the world stage at America's behest since really the end of the Cold War, because they've been doing this hide and watch game. And we're going to talk about the Chinese economy, and I won't steal my own thunder there. And we'll talk about, how strong the Chinese economy actually is and whatnot. But really what China's been doing is they've been playing this hide and watch game, and they've just there's a political truism that says, if your opponent is making mistakes, let them and stay out of their way. And that's what they've been doing. Right? As we extend ourselves in this war, we just got out of a 3-theater war in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other places that we called the GWOT for 20 years. China wasn't engaged in that. China wasn't spending money on that. There were no. I've deployed a couple times. Have I ever seen a Chinese section of a military base where the coalition is helping to fight terrorism? No, because they don't care. They don't care because that's not in their 100-year plan, and they've stuck to it. Xi Jinping, they disarmed their population, number one. They had the Great Leap Forward, number two. They had their third or fourth industrial revolution where they started stealing intellectual property and they shored up their internal processes. And from there, really what they did is they wanted to solidify themselves on the world stage, and they haven't wavered from that. And there's a little bit of credit that I can give to them to say, good on you, because you stuck to that plan and it's really starting to show dividends. All of this stuff to say, China has started to move themselves into a position of power, and those things are starting to reap benefits. And you're starting to see it even in the MSM. So there was always these underpinnings or these rumblings of, the Chinese. I've been to deployed locations where I lived less than 1.5 kilometers away from a large Chinese installation.
Yep.
I've been places where, they're doing things and providing infrastructure, and the One Belt, One Road initiative, and the MCF, which is the military civilian fusion, essentially, of China, where they blend all of these things together. It's not like here. It's not like you have a military and a civilian population, and those two things are completely disassociated. A long time ago, China started blending these two things together, both for industry, for funding, for personnel, for the larger overall CCP initiatives. And now we're starting to see those things come to fruition. So when we start talking about things like brokering peace between Saudi Arabia and Iran, when we start talking about their involvement in BRICS, when we start talking about their continuation of One Belt, One Road, and how many places that they have inroad, those are all really just little ticks in the marker of where they're going with that 100-year marathon thing. The issue here is that we have shrunk so much on the world stage. that we have been unable to stop that growth. The growth has been exponential because we haven't been there to exert American force and might in those regions. And without deterrence only works if you have consequence, whether it be diplomatic, informational, military, economic, any one of those dime fill principles, right? Unless you can exert a cost on your enemy for doing so, whether kinetic or non-kinetic, they don't care. And that's why we see spy balloons across America. That's why we see huge military exercises in the Straits of Taiwan, because there is no deterrence. There is no what if. There's no consequence right now. And that's the worrisome thing about China right now, like globally. Like, we can talk about how to compete with them economically. We can talk about how to get ahead of their IP stealing and IP theft, and how it is that we compete with them technologically. Like we can talk about all those things. Those are easy. But the number one thing right now is that we have allowed China a long enough leash to start doing some things and be emboldened by their progress. And if objectively speaking, I look at it, they're doing a pretty good job.
And I agree with 100% of what you just said. And the other way that I think that the Chinese are doing a really good job, because warfare in the future, right, and now the current times is a lot different. If you expected it to look the way it did, even 30 years ago at the end of the Cold War, you'll be mistaken. And with the way the internet has completely changed the face of the world, one of the ways that the Chinese really, really leverage their power is in that information war. And they're very good about projecting an image. And I think that with how palpable that energy is that they put out there, and how easily people's minds are swayed based on what they look and see in front of them, that's another way, and that's another front. And when you need people to believe in your message, and then you're pushing a message that's anti-American, pretending like you're not having a genocide going on in your country, all these other things, and they lead in so many other ways technologically, right? And we can have a conversation about that too. But the information war, the propaganda, all of that, it's not new, but it's different now. And it is extremely more insidious than it was and has been in the past, because it's so much more readily available. It's so easy to manipulate things now. So that's a front too that I think people tend to discount or not think of right away, but it really makes a difference. 100% makes a difference.
Yeah.
You're both
unrestricted
right.
warfare.
Exactly. Yeah. Unrestricted warfare.
The thing you said, Aaron, you're talking about how, like, while your enemy's making mistakes, don't tell them about it, just let them do it. That's exactly what China did. Like you touched on a little bit with the global war on terror. China didn't participate in it at all. They kind of just let us do our own thing. And while they were doing that, China was in its own way kind of being like the U.S. after World War II. After World War II, the U.S. was like, hey, we're this huge powerhouse now. Because pre-World War II, we were pretty small, weren't really doing a lot of stuff. We were almost like our own little hermit kingdom. Yeah, coming out of a depression. So we started fostering a whole bunch of relationships, kind of being nice to everyone. That's where we kind of did the big push into the Middle East with all their kings and their rulers and stuff for oil and all that stuff. While we were dealing with global war on terror, that's when China was like, all right, this is our time to grow without really anyone noticing. And one thing that I think was a benefit of COVID is it kind of showed the whole world how far China actually was. I do believe that if COVID never happened and didn't shut down all these countries and supply chains, the world wouldn't have realized how much influence and economic power China would have had around the world on infrastructure and everything. I think if COVID didn't happen, China would still continue to be doing what it's doing, and it wouldn't really be that big of a conversation today. So COVID released to the world, hey, China's kind of got their fingers in everything. You got to look at them and kind of figure out what's going on.
Yeah, I don't disagree. And again, the big problem here, and you can look, if people disagree with China, whatever, who were the first people that negotiated with the Taliban once the Taliban took control of Afghanistan?
Like the
China. Before we even left.
I know.
We didn't even leave yet.
Yep, to make us look bad.
They didn't put troops in there. They don't care about stability. China doesn't have any troops on the ground there. They don't care about the genocide that's happening in Iraq and Afghanistan. They care about the natural resources which Afghanistan has. They care about the land bridge that they can leverage through there. They were the first people to go over there and be like, hey, what's going on? Hey, can we let's be friends here? They've done the same thing in Africa for decades now. Their influence on the world stage has become more and more prevalent, and at least more and more public. And I think you're right. I think when COVID happened, when people were, like, why does this matter so much? Oh, it's because China is being affected by this. The first videos came out of, people shaking and dying on the streets, and the propaganda. You're totally right. There's a couple things that China did really, really well. And number one is they control their message. When you don't have a free and open internet, when you don't have First Amendment rights, when you have an authoritarian state, a communist state truly, that can stop a message from getting out, well, you know what else they can do? Any message that gets out, they can craft it. And that goes from economically to politically to, the civilians. You don't have free internet in China. You can't Google. There's no Google. I think their Google is called Baidu, like your Baidu. There is no Google. The CCP controls the internet that you search. Like, you get the search function that they want. When you can control that message, we don't, and that's a great thing, right? Like, the First Amendment's awesome, and you can Google whatever you want. You can, if you do it right, you can search and find the right answers. However, that also plays against us, is because the message that gets out, there's a million different viewpoints and a million different expositions, where China doesn't have that, and they're able to shape world and geopolitical opinion because their messaging is so clean. Now, they do that through completely skullduggerous memes. Like the skullduggery that goes on in China is ridiculous. The fact that the Uyghurs right now, it's the largest genocide that's ever happened in modern man. After the Holocaust and after really the Great Reset forward, the Uyghur Holocaust that's going on right now, like, it's the Armenian genocide is really the only thing that even rivals the amount of human death and torture that's gone on in modern history, and it's still ongoing. Other than maybe the cobalt mines and the children that are working in Africa right now in order to get lithium batteries for the electric cars that we're supposed to go to. Other than that, really, the Uyghur genocide going on in China is crazy, and no one hears about it. You know why? Because China keeps a lid on it.
Well, what's frustrating about it is the whole point of the UN was to destroy, like, to not allow genocide, to not allow the craziness of World War II to happen again. But who's a main seat on that? Who also technically won World War II? China. So whenever it does get brought up, they have full veto power, and then the rest of the world just goes, okay, and then they look away. They'll come back up in about a year, and then they'll go veto, and then okay, and then they'll just keep doing that over and over again.
Well, and you look too, and we don't want to connect too many dots here because we're going to be on this podcast for 5 hours. But like, when you start talking about, like, who was the lead voice early in COVID that was telling us what we were supposed to do? The World Health Organization. Yep. Who runs the world? Who runs the WHO? China. So you're telling me it was essentially like, we're like, hey, this thing came for sure out of. By the way, you would get canceled. Like, congratulations, Gresh. Your podcast would get canceled, and you would get kicked out of the military if I dared 3 years ago to say that COVID came from a lab in Wuhan, China.
That's true.
But now we can openly say that because it's a true fact. That's what happened. Now, like, who engineered it and was it released on purpose? Like, those are some other things that we need to talk about, and who funded it and the NIH and yada, yada. Those are some other things that we're going to have to go deep on. However, that's a true fact now.
It is.
And the people that investigated the Wuhan lab and told us that was a complete and total inanity, they were just like, nope, that's not a thing.
It's just coincidence.
COVID came from a guy eating a bat in a wet market. Who was that? It was the WHO.
Yep, exactly.
Does that not raise anybody's eyebrows? And now, like, yeah,
the fact that there is a lab in Wuhan to study the novel coronavirus, right? And then
Wuhan
we just so happen to have a
Institute of
pandemic.
Virology.
Yeah.
And there is here's the thing too, is, and people forget, but I alluded to it earlier. There is no such thing as personal or entrepreneurial property in China. The CCP owns every single thing. In order to be a business in China, you have to have a committee from the CCP that sits on your board. Also, that money cannot leave the Chinese economy. So McDonald's can operate in China But that money goes into a bank that's managed by the CCP, and then that money cannot leave the CCP to say go back into American interests or whatever. It can only be reinvested back into Chinese businesses. The WHO is an arm of the CCP. Therefore, ipso facto, everything is an arm of the CCP inside of China. So we had an entity that owned the WHO, right? So CCP owns WHO. The WHO was investigating the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Wuhan Institute of Virology was like, nah, we didn't do it. And then the WHO was like, I don't think they did it. And China was like, we didn't have a part in it. And everybody just took that as fact.
Yep.
And then we locked down for 2 weeks to flatten the curve. And 3 weeks later, oddly enough, it continued.
Yep.
And now 3 years later, here we are.
Earlier you were talking about how like the openness of our internet and all this stuff is kind of a disadvantage to us in some ways, while it's also a positive thing. The way that the Chinese government uses that civil and military fusion for taking all the tech information and all that stuff, it's 100% an advantage that they have against what we have, And I'm not saying that nor advocating that the U.S. government should just steal a bunch of IP from all these private industries. But it was 100% an advantage that they enjoy because of that. And they are able to leverage the greatness of the minds that there are in China, because there are, you know what I mean? And use it to their favor. And it's one of these things where it's like a double-edged sword for us, have an open and free society, which is the best way it should be, right? And then a country like China has this super authoritarian way of doing business, and they have... they're just basically stealing things from their own citizens.
Well, it's not even something they do. It's not even something they do just to their own people. They do it to the countries that they partner with as well.
Yeah.
Like the whole, I think it was in the early 2000s, the African Union wanted to like make their own like building where they could all come to and like talk together, kind of like the UN, but just for Africa in a sense. And China was like, we'll build that for you, no problem. We'll put you on a 100-year loan, and you as an entire continent can just pay it off over time, and that'd be great. So they built this whole thing, and it was a couple of years later, this IT guy was like in the server room, and he was like, wow, like every week on like midnight on a certain day, a lot of data gets transferred out of this very classified, very tight-knit server room to some random place over in China. Why does that happen? So he started looking more into it, and then China was like, oh, whoops, we didn't mean to leave that open. And it's like, well, why'd you put that there in the first place? And what was funny is China was like, we'll go back there and fix it for you, no problem. And the African Union's like, no, we got it. We'll fix it ourselves. And then they scrubbed the whole building. They found microphones everywhere. Like China was just using that to spy on Africa as a whole.
It just makes me think of Mark Zuckerberg thinking it's a great idea to let a Chinese company run a cable under the Pacific Ocean and link it to San Francisco and just be like, yeah, this is fine. This is totally okay.
There'll be a back door in there somewhere.
Oh, dude,
several
it was there
of them
for a couple years.
Yeah,
the whole thing.
Google's artificial intelligence hub is there in San Francisco. Think of all the tech in this area, man, dude. It's wild. It's laughable.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
But anyway, so I totally agree with you, Aaron. You're talking about how like BRICS and the United States dollar, the petrodollar, is 90% of the rest of business done around the world is done in the petrodollar. And I agree with you that these are kind of just steps in the direction of dethroning the United States. They're not necessarily that those tones on the clock, that saying, bringing forth the end of the United States or its control. There's still time to take action to do things. But I do think that the Chinese are kind of speeding up what they're doing to try and enact a lot of these ideas they have that by the 100 year of the Communist Revolution, success of the Communist Revolution there in China. Taiwan, and to me, is kind of a, not necessarily just a point of conflict, but it's a symbol for a lot of things that the Chinese want to do. And I think that if we went to blows over over Taiwan, that even just the fact that we're entering into that conflict with them and entering into this space now that we're at, where we're all these shows of force. It does a lot for the Chinese without them having to actually do anything other than, you know, just be loud. You know what I mean?
So sure. So first of all, China's emboldened. 2022, mainland China's overall population fell to about 1.4, like 1.8 billion. That was down 1.4 billion a year earlier. So it fell essentially by like about 850,000 people. This is going to start happening precipitously. China is right now emboldened by the fact that they're fighting. And by the way, they're a very old population considering. The fighting male age population in China is declining a lot. Like that was a lot of the things, right? You know, the intelligence community for a long time was like, here's the problem is that China has the biggest standing military and they're going to be able to just essentially throw people at the meat grinder longer than we have, right? Like if our technological advances are essentially the same, they're just going to be able to throw people at the meat grinder longer than we can. War of attrition, we can't stand up to that. Well, that's not the same. That's not true now. They're starting to decline by almost 1 million people a year, and the fighting age male population is going down faster than that. I want to say that's declining at a rate that's almost 20% faster than the actual declination of straight population, right? So they're becoming emboldened on a world stage where they need to start taking control of some of these things because their economy, and this is the dirty secret about the Chinese economy, China controls every bit of information that they have about their economy. So when it's essentially like saying, you know, we have a bunch of different, we have the Fed, SEC, we have watchdog groups, we have FOIA, we have, you know, individuals on Twitter and Facebook that can really like dig into US financials and be like, wait, this is exactly what the economy is, it's falling. China controls all that. China has been telling everybody this is how good our economy is for this is however long, and there's nobody to check them. They're like, well, you just have to trust us. This is how good our economy is. China's population is declining, and there is a large economic collapse that's going to happen in China very, very soon. And you can go on Google Earth if you would like, and you can find entire cities that have been built that are completely vacant, that are valued at a population that is supposed to be inhabiting these things, right? Like if people were living in these huge apartment complexes, and I'm talking 20, 50, 100,000 vacant domiciles, right, that they built. And they're like, well, if people were paying this amount of rent, this is how much of that would be coming in. And that's how they cook their books, essentially, and say, this is how much these things are worth. They're a paper tiger. It's a balloon. It's a bubble. Well, now, since their population is declining and they don't have the might to back that up, they don't have the military oomph behind it, if you will, now things are starting to get, and you see them starting to get more and more emboldened on the world stage. And you see, it's actually a good sign, but it's also terrifying. It's the first time in the last 5 years that they've accelerated a single point on that 2045 plan and on the 100-year marathon thing. The first time that they've accelerated a single point happened within the last 5 years, and they've done it 3 times so far. That is very, very telling for the Chinese Communist Party because it shows that they're panicked. The number one thing that you can always bet on the Chinese Communist Party for doing is doing the hide and wait. Like, let's just see how this plays out. We're just going to sit. To see them act on a global scale like they are now, and to see those other correlative factors sort of line up, and you're like, wait a second. Your economy isn't that good. You were crushed by COVID way more than we were. The Chinese economy was crushed way more. They've just lied about it, right? Remember the early days of COVID where they were like, oh yeah, we have 0 cases of COVID. And you're like, oh, word? You have people packed into high rises, and it seemed like from these satellite photos that you have hundreds of thousands of people dead. They're like, no, we got like 40 cases of COVID. And you're like, that doesn't sound right. Well, they did the same thing with their economy, and now they're doing the same thing with their population decline. And it's really started to spook them on the world stage. So this would be a time if we had a competent administration that was ready to do a move, like, and now's the time you ratchet up the tariffs. Now is the time that you ratchet up the trade impacts. Now's the time you ratchet up some of these military exercises like that just happened. I think it was, it was one of the PEXs. I can't remember off the top of my head. I'd have to look. Brandon, you sent it to me earlier, but now is the time to ratchet up some of these military exercises and be like, hey, China, respectfully, fuck around and find out. We know you guys are on the brink, and we're going to start putting the pressure on. But people are unwilling to do so.
Here's exactly, man. You talk about deterrence, and you said this on the last podcast too. Deterrence is backed up by strength, and when you have the speak softly but carry a big stick mentality, right? Projecting American power, holding these exercises, speaking and acting strong on the world stage. These are all things that need to happen. And you highlighted a lot of things when you were talking, but obviously just how great the Chinese propaganda machine is to get all these people around the world thinking the way they do about the Chinese. But have you heard about the China's forest to farmland policy?
No, hit me with it. Let's go.
So the forest to farmland thing is where they're essentially just leveling all of this forest to make into farmland eventually, trying to basically recover from the fact that they are going to need food to feed this population. And there's been a few people recently from China who have somehow made videos and gotten it around the world about the deforestation that's going on there just to turn it into farmland, kind of signaling potentially a food shortage. But to me, that's just another indicator, like you said, just how feeble their economy really is. And again, how well they project their strength when they're not strong in that way. You know what I mean? Having a policy of needing to turn all these natural resources into just farmland, says a lot to me, and it's just another thing in a notch in that belt, so to speak.
Yeah. So, and then the other part of that is there's actually another part of that program where they're trying to also return farmland to forest. So it's returning forest to farmland and farmland to forest. And it's the largest and most successful payment for ecosystem services program in the country. So at the same time, they're playing into the West's need for ecosystem development and green push.
Meanwhile,
while also being the world's second largest polluter of all greenhouse gases in the history of the world. And they're only behind India. And the only reason India is ahead of them is because India's population is remarkably larger and increasing year by year, as opposed to China, which is declining really now by 850,000 per year.
Yep.
It's just another thing that they're doing, man. Again, the Chinese will tell you that, they've done a good job in infiltrating sort of especially the elite rung of where we are. It's very telling when, Akron native himself, I'm an Akron guy, and Akron native, LeBron James will speak out about systemic racism as he sees it, but he won't speak out against the Uyghur genocide that's going on with the company that makes his shoes. When the NBA won't speak out against China, you know why? Who's the number one contributor to NBA in the private sector? China.
Yep.
And people try to parse it out, and they're like, well, Chinese businesses are. It's not China. You have to understand something.
China business is China.
About China. There is no such thing as private business in China. It's owned by the board of every single businessman that makes an investment is getting either direction or advice, whichever way you want to play this, from the CCP. And if you're a business in China, you have someone on your board from the CCP that directs some portion of it, and then those funds are subject to Chinese actual redistribution. They can just take your money and say, hey, you're doing really well, we're going to give it to this place, or we're going to give it to this place, and they package it up as free market, and it's a lie. If you want to learn way more about this, go to the book Stealth War. It was published, I think, in 2019, 2020. It's as true today as it was written, and it's more prophetic than it is correct, which is a large statement because it's very correct, and it's even more prophetic.
Yeah. China's definitely doing the big smoke and mirrors. They, like you were saying, Gresham, they tear down this forest to make farm, and then couple years later, they go, okay, that farm needs to be forest again, so they turn it
Mhm.
into forest. But all it's there for is just to show the world, look at all the stuff we're doing. We're building all these farms, and then you look a little bit later, well, where'd the farms go? Oh, well, we're doing forests now, and then, well, where'd the forests go? Oh, we're building farms now. Come invest in our country so we can stab you in the back later, please. It'd be great.
Yeah. Meanwhile, I want to say they have the biggest land ownership and the least amount of land usership on the face of the planet. So China in itself is the biggest country that there is, but they
Mhm.
pack everybody into the smallest proportional amount of where actually people live.
China, as we
Yeah.
know it, is essentially the coast. You know what I mean? That part of
Yeah.
all of Western China is extremely rural. But I'm curious, man, to know your thoughts, Aaron, on essentially the idea that the civil military fusion that goes on in China, why the United States has, and not just the United States, Canada, Europe has all these companies that do business with the Chinese, knowing full well that everything they do is going to be taken and given back to China. But at the same time, the U.S. government does a hell of a job pushing away our own private sector through bureaucratic methods and just some of the other hurdles that they put up. What do you think the United States needs to do better as far as that goes to get and leverage a lot of the brilliant minds that we have here in the United States and people that want to come to the United States to kind of, let's be honest, even the playing field when it comes to a lot of the technological advances and advantages that the Chinese enjoy over us right now?
Okay. So point one, the only reason that American businesses, like, because we are free market capitalism, so they're duped into thinking that China has a free market capitalist society, and they don't. They are really unaware of how it is that China is going to go about brokering these deals. But the number three issue here, and it's the biggest one, is because of the profit margins. Because China is able to direct a lot of those funds towards these American businesses, they're like, dude, these profit margins are too good to turn down. And they're like, well, you're going to have to keep your profits inside of here. And they were like, well, that's fine. But if I'm making $5 billion, $5 billion is $5 billion. I'm going to get paid. And then I'm going to be able to like make more businesses inside of China. They don't realize until they've got the hook that those funds are never leaving China. And China is going to control what they do with those profits unless it's inside of a very narrow range. So number one, what we have to do is better education with American businesses when we're dealing abroad. We really, and it's a cliche thing, but it really has to be a more made in America nationalistic sense for how it is that we go about commerce on the international stage. It's awesome to do business internationally and expand your brand, but you have to ask yourself, I have this small brand that I think is going to be a niche market, and all of a sudden I have Chinese businessmen offering me 10x of what I thought I was going to get inside of America. That's for a reason, right? It's almost like the same thing when we talk about social media. If something is free, that means you're the product.
You're the product.
Instagram is free because you're the product.
Exactly.
Facebook is free because you're the product. If you don't have to pay for it, you're the product, my guy. There is a reason behind the market strategy that they're using. If they're paying you 10 times what you're worth, there's either two things. One, you've underestimated your worth, or two, you're worth more to them. You're worth 10 times more to them than you are to the American public. So number one, it's education. Number two, we really have to light a fire under innovation and remove the bureaucracy and what it is that we do, especially in the military industrial complex. It used to be we would bring in bright minds. Like Elon Musk would right now be working for NASA and for DARPA and to be saying like, hey, here are the things that we're going to do to increase our might on the world stage. Reagan was great at this. And I had a bunch of problems with Reagan too. Like, again, I got to say this just because people hit me on it all the time. Like, I'm not a Reagan guy, but he did a great thing by bringing in innovation, and he led that race by going, okay, you know what we're going to do? We're going to circle the wagons a little bit after the Cold War. We're going to let free markets find better innovative solutions to some things that we're doing, and then we're going to incorporate those into the military. We incorporated so much red tape and bureaucracy into these, like Raytheon and Harris. We have an entire suite of systems that can't talk to one another. The F-35 can't talk to an F-22, and neither one of those can talk to the ground forces they're supposed to support. And all of them need hardware and software updates constantly to not talk to one another. And all of that comes with a price tag because we've monetized the upgrade process and not the actual function of the thing that we're supposed to buy. China has capitalized on that by stealing our intellectual property straight up. And you can look at it through the XP5 program. The XP5, if you remember, the Navy had a drone that they were supposed to be able to launch from an aircraft carrier, and they had a very specific design. China made a whole hype video about this program that we canceled 3 years earlier. They were like, oh, we're launching this thing before the Americans. We're like, yeah, we canceled it, but they just didn't have that information. It's apparent that they're stealing our IP. It's apparent that they're doing this for whatever. But that's because we have made a system that is so slow moving that we can't design, implement, and field pieces of equipment or pieces of technology ahead of everybody else. We haven't changed what we've done since World War II. When we went into shock and awe, everybody was like, oh my God, you guys have smart missiles and whatever. We weren't that successful in Iraq. We were using the same tactics we were using in World War II with a more exquisite technological suite. But it didn't mean that we were better. It meant that Iraq was worse. It meant that we were able to just stage people wherever the F we wanted. We could just put 1 million people in Kuwait and then just decide to fly fighter jets wherever we wanted and then just bomb shit. And we would put videos on the Congress of putting a bomb through a heating vent and everybody just creamed their pants over it. And you're like, okay, but we've had that technology for 20 years. That's not exquisite. That's not new. Meanwhile, China's playing around with AI learning and machine learning robots and no kidding things that can make decisions faster than us on the battlefield. And they got that from us.
Yep.
But because we're so slow moving, what we need to do is we really need to integrate some of these smarter spaces. The fact that SpaceX is going to have a no kidding mission to the moon, the first time that we've been back to the moon, if you believe we went to the moon, the fact that SpaceX is about to go back to the moon for the first time since the 60s, and it's like, where's NASA? We fund NASA at like 50 to 75 billion a year. Why haven't we been back to the moon? Why haven't we put a man and a woman back on the moon?
We lost the technology to do that. Supposedly.
That's a ridiculous thing to say. Yeah. A ridiculous thing to say. And the fact that we, the leading military in the world, we have a Space Force now. Oh, really, Space Force? Well, what does your low orbit space deployment look like? Yep. They don't have an answer for that. We don't have an answer for that. But I'll tell you who does. Elon Musk. If we believe all these things are true, Elon Musk has low orbit space because he took a rocket off and landed that rocket for the first time back to the place that it launched.
Yep.
And then Amazon is competing with SpaceX to do the same thing. That's ridiculous.
And they're reusable.
You should have them work. Thank you. You should have them working with the same folks that the military is working with, and we should be enhancing military capabilities in order to gain a technological advantage against our pacing challenge, China, and our acute threat, Russia.
Yep.
You want to talk? Oh, well, I don't know how we're going to beat these hypersonic missiles. Well, if you had a space station that was actually floating even faster than the hypersonic missiles, you could easily target them with, say, a laser that you can mount from a ship that we already have, and then you could blow that hypersonic missile up.
Dude, I'm so
that would
glad.
Be pretty simple, right?
Yep. Aside from the fact that the Kinzhal is not an actual hypersonic missile in the modern sense, okay? I'm so glad you brought up Russia because it begs to talk about Ukraine right now, okay? So you're talking about all of these archaic ways the United States military projects power and moves around the world. It's a lot of the same ways we were doing it 70 years ago. The biggest way that we need to change the way we do warfare, like you said, is having systems that talk to each other and having a ton of systems that talk to each other, and not just different, not a lot of different systems, but a lot of the same platforms, right? And to where you can have an attrition rate that's really, really high. And I think Ukraine has done a really, really good job of showing that with the way drones have been implemented into warfare. But the other thing with that is, are you familiar with the term that DARPA coined called mosaic warfare?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So the concept that all these aircraft, like you said, the F-35 being able to talk to other aircraft, or you have attack helicopters being able to pinpoint and coordinate for, let's say, like artillery to be able to fire upon positions where there are personnel or other artillery or whatever. This concept of total interconnectedness. We have systems, our phones, these computers right now, we're on Discord talking. They all talk to each other no matter. You could go to Paris right now and you could still talk to me because of the cloud-based data, the interconnectedness of these devices we have. There's zero reason why the military should not be employing these technologies that already exist. And I think,
Bro, do you know how Apple Maps works?
it's crazy.
You know when you're using like your Apple Maps, like when you have your phone and you're driving and the road turns right ahead of you and you're like, oh, why is that? You know why? Because it pulls data from every single other phone and it has slowdowns and it hits triggers and then it turns that part of your thing red.
Exactly.
I've been across a room from somebody in an emergency situation and I couldn't get my radio to talk to his radio. That's ridiculous.
It is.
You're telling me that my map will turn red on my phone because, and they're not like texting. So it's not user driven. It's the speedometer on the phone, the GPS on the phone slowed down. There was actually a guy that he got like 100 different iPhones that were all connected, and he would tow them around in a wagon to screw people's trips up. He would just walk down in a wagon and it would screw everybody's Apple Maps up because he was going 5 miles an hour and it looked like a traffic jam and it would screw with Apple Maps.
That's the ultimate troll.
But we can't target. You're telling me, we can't target select and Blue Force tracking is always an issue for us.
Yes, it is.
On the ground in combat, it's always Blue Force tracking. Where are friendlies? Where are friendlies? Where are friendlies? Bro, Apple Maps knows where I am.
Mm-hmm.
My wife, I share my location. She knows where I am on my phone. She can just look at it and she can be like, oh, yeah, tight. And it's 24/7. Yep. Yet you seem to sit here and tell me, like, and if you look at, like, it's a great juxtaposition as well. Russia, we found, is a paper tiger. Russia was, the intelligence community owes me a fucking apology about how strong Russia was.
I'll let them know.
Because these guys, they're fighting trench warfare in Ukraine with modern weapons right now. Are you serious? We would the Ranger. Imagine the Ranger Regiment going to Ukraine to fight Russia right now. They would clap cheeks. It would be a wet T-shirt contest up in that bitch, and everybody's getting a high skin fade.
Dude.
These motherfuckers, these hungry motherfuckers from Money Bat over here. Those guys are running a fucking train on everybody that Russia has to offer. And they have no idea how to utilize artillery. They have no idea how to utilize, mechanized infantry at all. Their techniques, like they've resorted to World War I. They haven't progressed. They've regressed.
Yep.
Other than some drone warfare and other than some, Generation 5 fighters here and there, this has been an amateur hour of what's been going on over there. And people look at this and they're just like, oh no, we have to worry about it. Like, do we?
I'm pretty sure the Blitzkrieg marched right over the Maginot Line in World War II, just proving how obsolete trench warfare is. And go ask the French how trench warfare really is. Yeah, exactly. And I have had the same thought with all the video, the TikTok videos, the Instagram reels, whatever, of these dudes just sitting in these bunkers. And it's like, dude it's
tragic.
1915 again.
Imagine, and these kids are 18. Like the loss of human life is not lost on me. And I don't mean to be dismissive of it, but dude, we're talking about bunker. You're digging a bunker and you're fighting for 15 feet full of ground in the middle of eastern Ukraine. Like, what are we doing? What are we doing?
Yep.
Yeah. And then you have like Russia. They take like weeks to months to do anything. Like today, they apparently launched 150 to 200 missiles into Ukraine, but they haven't done anything for the last 2-3 months. They just sat there staring at each other. And it just goes to show you're a paper tiger. they take too long to do anything or to make a decision because their NCO core sucks. They have no leadership except for just one dude at the top, and
Well,
they don't
imagine
trust
too.
anyone.
Put that timeline in the context of, say, the first Gulf War. America was largely upset with the first Gulf War. Why? Because they thought it took too long. It was called the 48-hour war, the 101-hour war.
Yep.
Like we rolled over we rolled over exactly what Russia had. Russia is a gas station with nukes. Russia has the GDP of Florida and a couple nuclear weapons, and everybody gets it. There's this hand wringing, and it's like, oh no, what are we going to do about Russia? I don't know. Bomb the fuck out of them. Send these hungry boys from the 82nd Airborne and let them go eat, because there's a bunch of dudes that are pissed off that they barely missed GWAT. This shit would be handled. I don't know what to tell you as far as like military tactics, techniques, and procedures are concerned. It's really not that hard of a problem. It's a pretty well-defined area. But it just goes to show, if we back out to what we were originally talking about, the threat that China and Russia present on the world stage aren't the tactical problems.
No.
The threat that China and Russia present on the tactical stage are, how does it actually damage our ability to cause consequence and therefore have deterrence? And because we've acted so weakly in these environments, funding to $110 billion and some advisors on the ground only to have this protracted war play out over a year and a half now, that doesn't do anything for our deterrence. Having China be emboldened by us not acting on a world stage in a way that's strong, that detracts from our deterrence. And that's going to cause us costs in the future. That's the issue. And people miss this all the time. They're like, well, we're degrading Russia day by day, and we would spend more than $110 billion by going to war with Russia. Well, okay, yeah, but have two thoughts in your head at the same time, right? And that's where we started. Okay, yeah, you're right. We are degrading Russia, and they are at about 45% of their military might right now, thanks to what Ukraine has done with our help. But if we did nothing but had deterrence, I'm sorry, can you tell me what Russia did on Trump's watch?
Nothing.
Oh yeah, it was nothing. It was nothing, because he would go to dinner with a world leader, and then he would kill a guy, and he would go eat chocolate cake, and he'd say, hey, if you do that to me, I'm going to fucking kill you too. That's what deterrence looks like. And again, I'm not a Trump guy, but that's what deterrence is. It's consequence with actual motive and ability to do so. It's, if you fuck with me, I'm going to kill you, and I can do it, and I can prove it. And then people are like, all right, cool. And then you're able to exact other consequences that are less kinetic. For example, when you have very high tariffs on China, Trump got bashed when he wanted to put tariffs on China. Guess what? Those things,
racist.
it was xenophobic and it was racist. And guess what? It worked.
It worked.
It worked hand over fist. It worked. And if we did that consistently, we would be in a much better geopolitical position because we would have leverage. But at this point, we don't. And China is now emboldened because, again, they're losing their population and they're ready to step up on the world stage. And here we are.
Now, touch back on Russia just a little bit, just to get your opinion, Aaron and Zach. What would you say to the people that say that the Russians are almost turning the tide now there in Ukraine because they're taking over power plants and natural resource locations? Do you think there's any sort of credence to that, or do you think that's again, the talk?
Zach, I'll let you go first, bud.
I think it's just talk, to be honest. I think it's just we've already been shown that Russia's just a paper tiger, like Aaron said. They can win small battles here and there. They can take over a factory, but will they hold it? No. Will it mean anything?
Thank you. Zach, exactly. I hate to interrupt you, but I'd love to hear myself talk, but that's exactly what I was going to say. Is you can take over whatever you want. You only own it as long as you hold it, and they've shown that they can't hold anything. They don't have forces to put forward. They're not going to occupy. This is not going to be an occupation. And God forbid, I got to be honest, Russia, hey, anybody from Russia, if you're listening to this podcast, let me tell you, coin Nobody's won a coin war in the history of the world. If you think that you're going to occupy Ukraine in in an insurgency, I have some bad news for you, and it's only because I spent 20 years in GWOT.
And for anybody listening that doesn't
Especially
know what the
against-
term coin means, it means counterinsurgency. We're not going to give you a history lesson. You can go look it up.
Yeah, they're especially not going to win against you. Like, they're not going to win the minds or the hearts of the Ukrainians, who,
No.
at their core and at their like the very center of their entire existence, all Ukrainians believe they are Russia. Like, they are the original Russia. The Russian Federation can't take that from them. That's where they came from, is Ukraine, and Ukraine will fight them tooth and nail.
Point right at the kulaks who were massacred and left to starve under Stalin. You know what I mean? They remember.
Yeah. So and I can't agree with you more, Zach. Like, you just absolutely crushed it. But yeah, Russia's not going to roll in there and okay, great. So for a second that you hold Chernobyl, for a little while you hold these power plants, for a while you hold these things. You don't have the logistical backing, and your country can't actually logistically or financially support you in these endeavors. You simply don't have it. So you're either going to extend yourself to a point, and Putin's not stupid. He is who he is on the world stage. And he's also dying, which is a fun thing, but nobody wants to report on that. But
scary.
No, he's dead. He's dying. They're looking for his replacement right now, and they're keeping a hold on that as they possibly, as much as they possibly can. But they're not going to be able to hold these positions. They're not going to be able to hold Ukraine. They're not going to absorb Ukraine. The world isn't going to stand for it. And at this point, they're so weak, and they've lost so many people. It really wouldn't be that hard to absolutely cripple them if, say, the world had the tolerance for it. If you get somebody that's more hawkish on warfare in the next election, I don't know who that's going to be. You get them a little bit more hawkish, and they're able to sway the UN into just a little bit of repercussions for Russia. Dude, they fold like a house of cards, and it's over because they can't. Zach, you hit it perfectly. You only own what you can hold and occupy. That's the only reason that GWOT went for 20 years, is because we could hold it. And to our great cost, we could also occupy it because we have the greatest fighting force that humanity has ever seen. And that's the only reason why we succeeded for longer than the Russians did in Afghanistan. But this isn't 1970s Russia. This is 2000s Russia. And now they're degraded by a cost of more than 50%. You're not going to hold... there's not going to be Russian bases in Ukraine.
No.
That's not a thing. You're going to get murdered. And I'll tell you what, the Russian, the groundswell to support this operation, Russian men and women are not going to want to go and die for this thing. They're not going to want to go to Ukraine and die. It's not a popular war.
No, the Russian media has done a really good job at suppressing the resistance there is in Russia to this war.
Yeah, they already can't. They've initiated their draft and like, hey, you have to show up. And they'll know like there's a able male at a certain residence who didn't show up, and they'll have to go there and grab him. And instead of now, you're wasting your more troops and resources just punishing this one individual than you would have got just ignoring it and fighting the actual fight you're trying to fight. And Gresham, you said way earlier in the beginning of this that World War II was fought the way it was, and everyone thought it was going to be like World War I, but it wasn't. And then you have the global war on terror and stuff, and it was fought entirely different than it was from like World War II. Russia's stuck in this idea of trying to fight this war as if it is kind of like World War I, World War II, when in reality, World War III is not going to be fought how we saw World War II at all. Me personally, I think that like future wars and like World War III or stuff like that, or how Russia should fight Ukraine if they actually want to win, is you don't put boots in the place you're trying to take over. You destroy their entire infrastructure, you just destroy their entire economy, and then you just kind of, almost like a siege, you just sit on the outside and you keep them all in there and make them fight themselves. That's going to be World War III fighting. If we ever do go to war...
So let's say let's have an experiment, right? So you said like a siege. Like let's go back to antiquity, 13th, 14th century. You're telling me that first of all, like the easiest way to do it is for a sickness, right? You like throw some bodies over the wall,
Catapult them.
and you get the plague in, right? So you degrade their health,
So
and then
something
you
about like what ancient or not ancient, early Americans did to like Native Americans, cough on a couple blankets,
exactly biological
give them
warfare.
a
So
couple
maybe there's a
blankets.
virus.
Sieging
Maybe there's a
towns.
virus.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a virus that you have that you release that eventually gets in there. And then you affect them economically by stealing their intellectual property. You make sure that they can't actually trade on the world stage. You start
Mhm.
taking their
Sounding
position
familiar.
and you structure to, I don't know, meat packaging, oil production, and then you start affecting their way to trade in oil on the world stage. And then you let all that cook, and then you establish a group of people that are, let's say, sensitive to your cause and that will never speak out against you. And now you have like a ruling class that's also in there. And then you degrade their sovereignty by degrading their borders, and you send a shit ton, like say 20,000 fighting age males to their border, and you have an influx of people that can just infiltrate them from the inside out.
Aaron, are you talking about Chinese asymmetric warfare?
That sounds really familiar, and it
does.
also sounds like what's been going on for the last 10 years in this
Yeah.
country with the fentanyl epidemic and COVID and our border and like that's a weird thing. It almost feels like guerrilla warfare, how I would destabilize a country.
Interesting.
What a wonderful model.
Would that be a pretty good argument to say that we're probably already at war with China? We just haven't officially
The
announced
Chinese are at war with us. Just not
Correct.
in the ways the
Just the
United States
Americans don't know.
recognizes war. It's not in the ways the United States
Yep.
recognizes war.
It's
And
not
that's
an
it.
official declaration, but we're at war.
And it feels like it. And if you go back to unrestricted warfare, and if you go back to the stealth war and the 100-year plan, like we've been laying out these breadcrumbs this entire podcast. The entire time that we've been talking, we've been laying out the breadcrumbs and the road plan for how we have been attacked on our homeland. And we just haven't said so explicitly. And this is my favorite part about being called a conspiracy theorist, and I've been called that a bunch of times, is that I can lay this out. I can be like, well, here's how China has their economy. Here's how we interact on the world stage. Here's how we've been distracted and weakened in this area. Here, like I can lay all these breadcrumbs out, and then at the end I go, and that's how we're already in unrestricted warfare, World War III, and people go, you're a conspiracy theorist. That's not how do you make that conclusion? Be like, no, I just laid it all out for you. Be like, well, yeah, but you can't.
because these
you can't
people,
say it all the way to the end.
no, they're afraid to
because
step
they
outside of
can't
their
have-
narrative.
Yeah, they can't have two thoughts in their head like we discussed earlier. And in their mind, World War III has to be fought like they saw on the History Channel when they see World War II.
So-
They can't comprehend a different type of warfare. And to quote Abraham Lincoln again, we did it earlier. America will never be destroyed from the outside. If we falter and lose our freedoms, it will be because we destroyed ourselves. And China is planting the seeds across the Mexican border through intellectual property, through just everything like that to
Buying farmland outside of every state. We just had
Yep.
Texas just enacted their first bill to say that you're no longer allowed. Chinese citizens are no longer allowed to buy farmland in China or in Texas because you have to be an American citizen to do so. It's plainly apparent. People are missing the forest for the trees when they look at this and they say this is not a deliberate motive that China is using to infiltrate America and to commit unrestricted warfare on the American country. And now here we are, and we just laid it out for them in a single podcast.
So
So
Aaron,
Aaron,
Oh.
I want to take
unplanned.
I want to take a pivot here, right? It's still about China and stuff. China is obvious going to be in relation to Ukraine too. So China's obviously trying to now be a mediator, right? They're trying to be like, hey, look at us. We will broker peace in this region and we'll solve everyone's problems, that type of stuff. Obviously, that makes America look very weak. It makes the West look very weak. It's something that I strongly believe cannot happen. Like that is a full fail situation on the global scale.
Agree.
What do you think the U.S.'s response to this should be? So far, we've obviously been supporting Ukraine, putting a ton of money into that region and stuff. And after you answer this question, I kind of want to give, I guess, my thoughts on why we give all that money there. Kind of like pick your brain with that as well. So the first question is just, what do you think the U.S. should do with China trying to broker peace and, I guess, take the global police power from the U.S.?
Man, and that's a tough one because there's a lot of nuance here. So,
Yeah,
Extremely.
very first thing that I would say is like no more money to Ukraine. There's no more funding. There's no more like I'm sorry, like this is not a thing that we can affect anymore. And that's not an answer for what do we do to combat China. It's an answer for what do we do to fix this problem, and then combating China is a secondary or third kind of order effect, secondary, tertiary effect of what we're doing there. So number one is we stop funding the proxy war in China, or in Ukraine and Russia. Number one, we have to. Number two is we start shoring up, we start chipping away at BRICS. We start like, okay, well, hey, Brazil, Russia, we're not going to be able to do anything with Russia right now, but like India, South America, there's a lot of spots there that we can start exerting our influence and be like, hey, we're good partners with you. Saudi Arabia, there's a lot of places that we have good inroads, and we start strengthening those relationships. Our relationship with Saudi Arabia, the fact that that's failed as much as it has over the last 3 years, holy shit, the degradation of that relationship over the last 3 years is amazing. You know what I mean? Like we had a strong alliance and partnership with Saudi Arabia before all this happened, and to see that fade away as fast as it has.
Biden said he was going to turn them into a pariah.
Yeah. I think that the issue here is, and I think that it's a non-answer, but I'll accept it because as I'm thinking about it in my head, I'm going to accept it as an answer, is that you don't need to do anything to combat China. You strengthen your ties with your other alliances and you box China out. You find a way to make sure that you shore up these relationships with Canada, with Mexico. We strengthen our borders. We have a little bit more of a nationalistic view as it comes to trades and tariffs and trade policy and trade regulation. We circle the wagons a little bit, and then we shore up our partners in Israel, and we shore up our partners in Saudi Arabia, and we shore up our partners across Europe. And then we have a united front because that's how we can take down China essentially without doing it. You don't need to go directly at China. We don't need to go into a shooting war. If we can just choke them out and starve them out and wait them out, I think
Like
that's important. Exactly. I think if we start thinking a little bit more about 100-year plan, we think in 4-year cycles. That's ridiculous. They're
Barely.
thinking in 100-year cycles. We can't think in 100-year cycles. Maybe we think in 50. But we think, hey, let's have some consequential steps that we can take, that we can start really weakening them on the world stage, and you don't have to go directly at them. If we're going to do unrestricted warfare, awesome. Then let's do it with our partners. Let's strengthen trade alliances. Let's make ourselves stronger on the world stage. And then when people are like, because really what you want is when China steps in and they're like, hey, we want to negotiate this trade peace. What we want is somebody else to come in and go, no. We want America to come in here because we know that they're going to be able to lead us in a way that we want. So that's my non-answer to you, Zach. I'm excited to hear yours.
Okay. So yeah, my question was more to get your answer and just kind of like listen to it because it's kind of leading into you posted a couple. You brought it up several times in this podcast, and you posted a couple weeks ago on your social media that like the money to Ukraine should stop and that it shouldn't be sent there anyways. I want to put a second idea in your head. All right, I want to make Aaron do the 2 idea thing. Okay. So there's 3 main reasons why I think the U.S. Is fully invested in this Ukraine venture. Right. The first one is having to do with testing equipment. So for the last 20 or so years, right, the U.S. has fought insurgents, people who don't have jets, who don't have like our technologies, that type of stuff. But we've still been advancing a lot of our technologies. Like the F-22's first aerial kill was a balloon off the coast of Florida, right? And it's been around
Yep.
since the early 90s. So I think that the first thing here, so the U.S. in Ukraine is all just like, I don't think the U.S. as a government really cares what happens to Ukraine here. They're using it as a test bed for personal gain. So they want to test new equipment against a relatively close peer, or someone that we thought was an actual peer, but they're further off than they actually are. But that's the first thing. We want to test equipment against an actual adversary. Uh, Two is to prove that the U.S., in a time of a global conflict, either in Europe or somewhere else in the world, can adequately supply and move equipment, especially in a region that may not have American troops. So, is there American troops in Ukraine? Probably. Probably some secret groups in
Yes.
there doing some weird stuff. But there's not a large force. And in this way, it's a way for the U.S. to prove to themselves and to show, hey, we can put a bunch of equipment and supplies on the front lines relatively quickly in weird environments that we might not be able to do normally, if that makes sense. And the third reason I think has to do with economy and the recession that is looming. So there's five main points that is supposed to put the U.S. or an economy into a recession. First one is a decline in real GDP. Next one's a decline in real income or income after inflation. Next is rise in unemployment, stagnation of industrial production, and then decline in consumer spending. So basically, less money being spent, less money being made, and then 2 quarters of negative GDP. Before the Ukraine conflict kicked off, the U.S. had 1 quarter of negative GDP. Then the Ukraine war kicked off, and then all of a sudden, we just barely, that next quarter, barely made it past non negative GDP. And we've been barely over non negative GDP this whole time. And my idea behind this is yes, we send a lot of money to Ukraine, but it also kind of built back up our military industrial complex. So right now, the government, their GDP is building, it's getting higher, it's getting like it just barely stays up. And the whole purpose of this, and they'll keep funneling money into Ukraine, is to keep that industrial complex going. And the U.S. doesn't want peace brokered because they want this conflict to go as long as it can to keep money moving. Because if we have the 2 quarters, we already meet 4 of the 5. If we have the 2 quarters of negative GDP, then the U.S. has to say they're in a recession. And if the government actually says we're in a recession, then it's going to suck because then people will spend less and a whole bunch of other stuff.
And it wouldn't be the first time we've used war to pull ourselves out of recession.
Yeah, it's a great way. It pulled the U.S. out of a Great Depression,
Yeah.
an entire war.
Yeah.
So Zach,
That's my
love it.
thoughts. That's
No.
why I think the U.S. is so invested in it. It has nothing to do with Ukraine, has nothing to do with preserving them or
Agreed.
their freedom because they're corrupt anyways. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on with that as well. It's just for our self-interest to keep us relatively strong and to try to keep our economy going in a time after COVID and to just try to stick up to our enemies.
got you. So I'll respond in kind, right? So number one, in the test and evaluation phase, we have the best test and evaluation in the history of the world. We don't need to test against a peer adversary. We know, like, we talk about China stealing IP all the time. We steal more IP than China does. Like we 100% do. We know their capabilities. We know their vulnerabilities. We know that we are about a 10% extra. Like we say, well, they're going to be able to kill us to this level. Really, they're going to be able to kill us to here, and we can perform to here. We don't need to test that in a real world thing. Number two, the logistical chain argument. Dude, I get it, and I hear you. We do this legitimately all the time. We move large, like these exercises that we do and these large scale movements that we do, we exercise this all the time. We have unfettered access to everywhere in the world at a moment's notice all of the time, no matter what. So if it was a thing where we were denied access to an area and they were like, oh yeah, well, you can't possibly move all the equipment and people that you need to into, say, the Philippines. I would say that there are special forces groups that move in the Indo-Pacific and then like just set up shop in random countries that we have like tacit approvals with any time of the year, 3 times a year. There's a bunch of series right now that I could say that we do that all the time. So for that one, okay, got it. I agree. From the logistical move anywhere and set up shop anywhere, like multi-capable airmen and agile combat employment and our operational imperatives. No, I think I agree with you there. Like it's a good dry run for this. The thing that I want you to focus on is that people's lives are hanging in the balance. We can be as cynical as we want. People are dying in Ukraine and Russia all the time. So while we're playing this drill where people are actually dying due to 5th-gen warfare, that's an issue. And that's a moral and an ethical thing, that it's a nuance that we need to roll into this thing. As we move through your points, we get to the kind of the last like 2 or 3, which are sort of wrapped up in what is the actual benefit of letting these two fight it out and letting these folks see essentially what happens in this modern warfare sort of scenario. And that's really what everything is wrapped up in, right? Is what cost can we impose on the enemy in order for us to see, like, can we no shit impose costs moving forward, right? I don't disagree with any of your points. And I think they're all valid. And I think they're all good thought experiments for why should we be involved here. When we start talking about the economy, it's a zero-sum game. The danger that you have of venturing into the economical gain is I look at 110 billion that we've already approved of, 30 of which we can't account for. So when you talk about how much could 30 billion affect or improve the American economy, and like, okay, it kept us above the line, right? For what it is we call, we have shown through COVID that the government will fudge the numbers and say, well, yeah, I mean, it's supposed to be 2 quarters, right? But like, yeah, technically we were down for these 2 quarters. We're already in stagflation. The impending economic collapse is already a narrative that we're already talking about, right? Like stagflation is too much money chasing too few goods with too few unemployment numbers that are following. This empirical evidence can be observed by when was the last time you went to a restaurant and you got great service?
Dude, that literally happened to me today.
You got great service today?
No, I'm saying I was at fucking Home Depot waiting for 40 minutes for somebody to help me. There was literally no one around.
You know why?
McDonald's can't even get my chicken nuggets right.
You know why? And McDonald's is laying off hundreds of thousands of people. So is Meta. So is Facebook. So are these people that are supposed to be untouchable. We're already in stagflation. Mm-hmm. The numbers or the definitions of these things where you're like, okay, and this is maybe a correlation versus causation sort of thing. We can show you the numbers to where we're like, okay, unemployment is at this level and we haven't had 2 consecutive quarters of decline in GDP, and that's technically not whatever. I would ask you to look at your normal life. When you go to a restaurant, I don't remember the last time that I got a quick, efficient service. I don't remember that I got seated the last time. I don't remember that like stores were open at normal business hours. That hasn't happened since the beginning of COVID.
Yeah.
And during COVID, they told us the economy was booming as well because of online and delivery services and all these other things. Well, lo and behold, you're telling me unemployment is low, but nobody wants to work. Everywhere is hiring, but no one's hiring. Try to go get a job right now. It's I got to be honest with you. Like, when you start venturing into the economic argument for this war, and I get it because the military industrial complex, sure. However, usually what that means is that people are going to war. When you fold the recruitment and retention problem into this thing, we're missing numbers everywhere, bro. DOD
You're literally speaking to a recruiter right now.
Yeah.
The DOD ain't making numbers, bro. Like, if you're making your numbers, congratulations, because you're the only one nationwide.
Yeah,
and I'll tell you what,
it's a goal, but
sentiment for not. Yeah, sentiment for those numbers is exceptionally low. And when you look at the polling numbers, pride in America and willingness to serve in the military and all of these other things, all of those numbers are trending downward. So when we talk about economical impact for this thing and it being a potential boon for America, you're talking about mere percentage points of treading water and not exponential growth for what you actually need. Every other number that we have is pointing downwards, from unemployment to GDI to GDP to UDP to UDI to actual price indexes. All of these things have been trending lower, to include housing. There is a housing bubble that is impending to burst, and we hope it's not as bad as 2008, but we feel that it's coming, and people are girding their loins for it, and the market 100% reflects that. So if we tie all these things together, and again, sometimes they feel like unrelated, and it feels like I'm connecting, like I'm Charlie Day, like connecting red yarn on about who is Pepe Sylvia? Who is Pepe Sylvia? Exactly. But when you look at it, man, I would say if we can save our international effort, if we can circle the wagons, if we can stop spending $110 billion a year, if we can focus on our border and actually focus
Balance
on
a checkbook.
Yeah, balance a checkbook, actually stop spending as we need to, stop cutting necessary funding at things that we actually need. I think that would be and again, I love that you called me out. I welcome the back and forth. You need to have two things in your head at the same time. What if I told you that I want to be nationalist? I want to have people in America that focus on America first and do America first things. And I do care about the other world, the rest of the world. However, they're going to have to handle their own problems as well. Yeah. And in order for us to be a world leader, we're going to have to circle the way, just like after World War II. And that was a great example. People forget World War II, we didn't expand our imperialism. We didn't go look for other places. We did the opposite. We kept the bare minimum of bases that we needed to make sure that fascism didn't expand, it didn't pop up, but we brought everything back here. We didn't even want to get into the Korean War. The Korean War was one of the biggest detractors from the American economy that's ever happened, and people forget that. Because if they would have just gone on the track that they had after World War II, we would have been unstoppable moving forward. And people often mistake that. But it's because we engaged again in another couple theaters of war, specifically the Korean War and then the Vietnam War, that crippled us as a company or as a country moving forward. And we should have never engaged in those things.
I just wanted to say, Aaron, you answered that exactly I thought you would. And it was a very intelligent and compassionate response, exactly what I was looking for. I wanted to get the two ideas in everyone's head that's listening to this podcast or watching, so they could kind of get both sides. So thank you for letting us flip the coin and watch it twirl in the air.
Dude, no, you crushed it. No, you brought up good. Those are things that people should be experiencing, and people should be really thinking through. Because I'll tell you, like, there's a part of me
your decision after actually looking at all sides.
No, and there's a part of me that agrees. Like, there are a couple of people out there that are like, hey, $110 billion really isn't that much to find out that Russia was a paper tiger. Like, we put $110 billion in and we figured out exactly who one of our adversaries were that we thought, remember this was years ago. Remember when Russia put out that propaganda ad of people in shaved heads? They were doing push-ups in the morning, and all the military bro vets were like, these guys are going to crush us. They're just going to whatever. And then like 2 years fast forward, you're like, these guys that can't even have a tank squad do a simple military tactic, these guys? Maybe 110 wasn't that much of a price to pay to figure out that these guys were a paper tiger. I'm willing to admit that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I think that moving forward, we have to use that information and actually make the way forward to the next thing. It can't just be a thing that's like, oh, okay, yeah, great. Like, we have to like look at that and go, okay, cool. We were wrong about that. And now we're going to change the way that we think moving forward. But I don't necessarily disagree with, hey, we weakened Russia. We only paid $110 billion to weaken Russia to 35% of their previous strength. I don't know. That's a pretty good and not a single American life is lost other than the people that went over there and fought for it for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, not too bad. I can understand that.
Kind of call that
they're not even a near peer anymore.
Yeah. Oh, no. They're not. And we even changed our language. They're a what is it? The acute threat. They're not the pacing challenge anymore. China's the pacing challenge. That's who we need to be.
And the only reason why they're an acute threat is because they just have the ability to launch nukes.
They're a gas station with nukes and a GDP less than Florida.
They might be able to launch nukes. We don't know that yet. That could be another
Right.
pig tiger.
Right.
Dude, honestly, I think the concept of nuclear warfare and using that as leverage is becoming antiquated.
Yeah.
We'll see. We'll see how we explode. Like tactical nukes is a very dangerous thing. Dirty bombs are a very
Small
dangerous
yield.
thing. Like
Yeah,
those,
I should
those
be more specific. The ICBM, that whole concept of mad mutually assured destruction, I think that's becoming antiquated. The TAC nuke thing that you're talking about, I think that has a lot more application in modern warfare than the ICBM concept for sure.
They're definitely. I could definitely see small yield nukes being used like
Against carrier strike
regularly,
groups.
almost. Yep. You just blow up a nuke in a
small
certain
Iranian
area.
boats.
Yep.
Guess what you just did? You just clogged up that area. No one can go in there. It's now technically your land because like the friendly's not going to go in there,
Yeah.
and you could wipe out an entire whatever in a blink of an eye.
Yeah. That's why a lot of these long range missiles that the Chinese are developing are so dangerous, because they have the capability to carry nuclear weapons, and they're practicing taking out carrier strike groups with these TAC nukes. And, getting rid of and eliminating that asset that we have that we outnumber the Chinese on is enormous. Should we go to blows in the Pacific? It kind of leads into the next question. Do you feel like this whole conflict with Taiwan, the United States, and China is imminent?
I feel like it's always imminent, to be honest with you. Like, do I feel like it's going to happen right away or whatever? I think the way that China approaches Taiwan is always a consistent pressure. It's always a consistent threat, especially with the threat of semiconductors as it stands now. I think it becomes less imminent as America stands up semiconductors in Texas like we're trying to do. However, that's again on a short timeline. It depends on the earlier question of how emboldened is China going to be and how shortened is the timeline that they're going to make. So, do I think that it's imminent where a real shooting war happens with an invasion of China into Taiwan? I really do think it matters a whole lot on who gets elected in America next. I think that timeline is going to change remarkably when we start talking about who it is wins the next America election. I think if Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, as it stands right now, I think if they get elected, I think that timeline becomes remarkably shorter. I think if anybody else gets elected, I don't care who, again, I don't give a shit about R&D, but I think if anybody else gets elected, China has to take a tactical pause to see how is this new administration going to react to us? How are they going to be? What are they going to do? I don't think they want to do it before the election, to be quite honest with you, because they don't want to provoke. Like all that means is you have a 180 out response from the new administration.
Right.
If China decides to invade Taiwan and then a new administration gets in there, all they have to do is campaign on, we're going to fuck China up for invading Taiwan, and that secures them enough American interest to get elected, and that flips the administration from one that is remarkably pro-China to one that they don't know. And I think China is too smart for that. So I think that they definitely wait. I don't think they do anything now because it's too close to the election. We're 18 months out. I think that actually emboldens somebody that's more nationalistic, somebody that's more hawkish on international politics, way more willing to engage with China in Taiwan over Taiwan. And I think that China is too smart for that. So I think what they do is they wait and see what's happening. They go ahead and saber rattle for a little bit more time. They have more international exercises and they have more international alliances, hoping that America elects the wrong person. And in my opinion, that's going to be the Biden-Kamala Harris administration. But if they don't, if they lose, that's interesting, because then China has to hold its cards to its chest. Because the first thing that you're going to do is not invade another country in the brand new, administration of the United States of America. Because you're going to get some cowboy out there. Imagine Ron DeSantis. Imagine Nikki Haley, imagine even Vik Ramaswamy, like any of these people, like any of these folks that are on the ticket right now, They can't wait to push the go button and have a win against China as the first thing they do in the administration. That would be devastating, not only to China, but to China's stance on the world stage. So I think that's a huge geopolitical mistake for them. So I think they can't possibly risk it. So it either happened, to be honest, it should have happened a year ago, or it doesn't happen until Biden wins the nod and the re-election, and it's early in his administration. I wouldn't expect, like, if he wins the administration in November of 24, if he wins that thing, that's China's trigger. They're going to be like, nope, we know who this is. Even if he steps aside and Kamala steps in, or blah, 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 whatever other conspiracy theory thing we're going to have for whoever actually runs the administration. That's the move for China, is you wait until the same friendly administration gets reelected and then you pull the trigger, as opposed to provoking a new administration that would just cannot wait to blow your shit out of the water in the Indo-Pacific.
I agree with you. I think that China has passed their timeline for when this could have happened for this current presidency to talk about 4-year cycles. The United States has those, right? But do you think
the good thing about 4-year cycles is every 4 years you get somebody in that really does want to wield American might, and it might be 180 out from what you have now. Like, China has the ability for their 100-year, like Xi Jinping already consolidated power through the next 100 years.
Absolutely.
He really, until he dies, Xi is the man. Mm-hmm. We don't have that here.
No.
We can change 180 out in 4 years on a dime. And in the midterms, we can change even more, because if the Republicans win the House and the Congress, the House and the Senate, and then can enact laws and are forced through the executive process, the president, to do other shit, we can even do that on 2-year cycles.
That's something Americans always forget, is that we boost up the presidential election the whole time, but that's just one of the 3 main pieces of the branches. Mm-hmm. You can actually change the mindset, the culture, the ideals of America just by voting locally. Your state representative, your county representative, all of that can have just as much weight as the president.
Let me ask you a question then. You were talking before about like semiconductors, TSMC, right? That big plant that exists on Taiwan. The more the United States understands that it poses a massive threat to what we want to do and need to do in the future, the more we move some of those abilities home and have the ability to be self-sustaining. Do you think that means that a lot of this, like you said, saber rattling and posturing that's going on right now, do you think that continues over Taiwan just as a show of force and presence and strength in the Pacific? Or do you think the more we bring that home, the less our interest in what happens between the Chinese and Taiwan is consistent?
That's a great question. Because if you play that question out to its logical concurrence, if you play that question out from step 1 to step 10, or whatever step it is, what if we brought everything home? Mm-hmm. What if we stopped overseas dependence on all of these things? Not just semiconductors, but energy independence. Mm-hmm. What if we brought that home to, international security? What if we brought that? And again, it's because I'm a white guy on a podcast full of 2 other white guys. This is going to turn into national extremism. But what if we really did put America first? What if we really did engage the XL pipeline? What if we did gain energy independence? What if we did stop rolling brownouts are still happening in California?
Tell me about it.
We're talking about moving to electric vehicles, and we don't have an energy grid that can support it. Our infrastructure is failing day by day by day. How many train crashes and energy plants and food, processing plants have blown the fuck up or done whatever? Here's a crazy thought. What if we circled the wagons and we brought everything into America and we leveraged American ingenuity, American capitalism, we leveraged the smart people that we have in America, and we fixed all of our own problems internally, and we stopped spending money externally for just a little bit in order to just kind of like reset America, and then we could go back out and we could start going like point by point by point with an actual international policy that supports American interests worldwide, that have partners that are included. You know how happy Mexico and Canada would be if we became the international hub for all of these things that we depend on everybody? What if Made in America became made like China, made in China? What
That'd be
if we were
incredible.
like, you know what? Let's talk about a border solution that allows for Mexican immigrants to immigrate into America to work in a factory where we produce a world good that we can give them a living wage. And this is going to be crazy, but I'm going to use a bunch of liberal terms here. We can give them a liberal wage. We can allow them to have international and individual dignity of a sovereign nation from Canada and America and Mexico. And we have a no kidding alliance and a trade system that is undeniable with the systems that we can use in Americas. And we can support and defend our international borders together and have sovereign states together. And then expand that influence in such a way that we don't have to worry about other influence other than our Western cultures. Because Mexico and Canada, even though Canada is a shit show right now because Trudeau is a fuckboy, that we have the same culture and the same values and the same morals and the same ethics. The Mexican people simply want individual freedom and the ability to work hard and to earn a dollar and to have the American dream. It's the Mexican dream to them.
Mm-hmm.
And imagine if we had an alliance in NAFTA or whatever we're calling it now, but the North American movement, the American movement in that corridor. Imagine if we had the hub of manufacturing and we stole it away from our world partners. Europe would then be investing in us. We'd be able then to have a more of an impact in Europe and in these other places in the world.
It's like, don't do it to them, Aaron. The world ain't ready for it, because I say this all the time. The United States has such untapped resources in working with its allies. You know, we have been so exclusionary for several decades with people right on our borders, and it makes zero sense. You know, what you're talking about and yeah, so what if it's a liberal idea, like bringing people in our country, making a way for them to be successful? Why not bring all these people that want to come into our country willingly and are willing to do the work?
Provide an easy way for citizenship. That's it. Like, dude, yeah. I'm in, but you have to assimilate to our culture. If you want to live here, you have to assimilate to our. That's it. Yep. Dude, that's all.
It makes me think of the briefs I got when anytime I've been overseas, they're like, "Hey, you're in their country. You're in their country." Like, that's not an unfair statement to make. You know, assimilate into this culture you want to live into so much, and it's not, you know, racist or xenophobic to say. It really isn't. Harnessing, it's just like having a resource like in the ground that you're just refusing to pull up and use to your advantage. You have all these people that want to come into our country, they're coming into our country regardless. Okay, create avenues, create jobs, create opportunities.
Dying and risking their children. If you want, like, the penultimate example of this is I had friends that were on the ground in Afghanistan. You know how bad people want to be Americans?
Hanging on
they
to
will
C-17s.
They will take their small children, their babies, and they will try to throw them over barbed wire.
Yeah.
So that Americans can catch them on the other side.
They'll hand them to a complete stranger, hoping that they'll get back to America.
For the hope that they live in America. That is the hope that America provides to the world. They will throw their children at you.
There's a parent that's
over
such a wild concept.
They will die. They will die to hope that their children live in America. And that is the one thing that America has that is special that no one else has. There's no place else in the world like this, that people will die to get there. And if they die, it's okay, as long as their children get to grow up there. Dude. And that is how great America is.
That is incredible.
There was literal videos. There's literal videos of when we were pulling Afghanistan of like 10s, 15s, hundreds of people just holding on to the wheels of aircraft, hoping to hold on enough to get out of there. It's insane. But you're right, Aaron. If we could put our differences aside just with our neighbors, maybe become not just the United States of America, but the United States of North America, and just become a powerhouse.
We're already a superpower.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have a question for you, man. So the president, Biden's mental decline, is very apparent to me and very apparent to a lot of other people. But do you feel like the sort of information that gets funneled through to him from like presidentially selected positions like the Director of National Intelligence, CIA, his President's Daily Brief, all of that is scoped down to make up for his mental decline? And then do you feel like there are other people involved in that process for him, decision-making process when it comes to national policy, with the intelligence that gets pushed up to the executive level? Do you feel like that A, does get scoped down, and B, if it is getting scoped down, do you think that it has detrimental effects to the way the United States faces the world?
Okay, so first and foremost, he's the commander in chief, right? Mm-hmm. Like he is the guy. I'll never disrespect the office. I'll disrespect the person if I think they're doing a bad job. You know what I mean?
Fair.
I think it's obvious that there is a mental decline, and it's just because I say that from my own personal experience, because I've watched Joe Biden for the last 20 years of my life. No kidding. Like, he's been involved in politics that entire time. I have watched him give speeches. I have watched him interact with press. I've watched him. It's not, I'm not saying this from YouTube clips or reels, on Instagram that I've seen from the last 10 years. I'm telling you from 20 years of my life experience, this is not the same person. His mental acuity is not there, right? So when we start talking about, kind of what you're getting at, the information that's fed to him, and do I trust that information? Man, I don't trust any politician ever, period. Number one. Number two, I don't think that anybody that is an unelected official should be trusted, period.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
it's kind of one of the things I was getting
I don't trust politicians, and I vote for them.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like,
right.
I voted for the elected officials that we have that in our representative republic represent us. So when we start talking about, like, I didn't vote for the head of the National Intelligence Consortium. I didn't vote for the chief of staff of the White House. I didn't vote for any of these people, to be quite honest with you. So when we start talking about, do I think that there's somebody behind the scenes that is driving policy decisions, and do I think that's appropriate? Number one, I don't have the subject matter experience to say that I know that that's true or that's not true. Number two, I don't trust any of these people anyway, and that's not being subversive. That's me being a private citizen of America. Mm-hmm. And in our political environment, I am a private citizen. The government should know nothing about me. They are a public servant. I should know everything about them. I should know everything about their bank transactions. I should know everything about their business dealings. I should know everything about who they're getting information from. I should know their daily schedule. I should be able to see every single email. I should be able to see every single text message. They're a public servant. I pay for their salary. As an American citizen, you should show me everything. If I walk to any elected official, you should show me your phone, and I should get the lot code, and I should go scroll. Who are you talking to? Who'd you have dinner with? Why did you have dinner with somebody from Moderna? Why did you make this stock trade? Where did you get this information to make $2.5 million? Dan Crenshaw has made millions in his time off of hundreds of thousands of input, meaning his salary. That is a travesty. If you would have traded like Dan Crenshaw and Pelosi, you would have outperformed the S&P index by something like 100%. Boy, that's weird. That's suspicious. You're telling me that these people are just that good at business after a lifetime in politics to be worth $100 million after I make more than $100,000 a year. Newsflash, everybody. I make about as much as Nancy Pelosi. With my special pays and with my bonuses, I make about as much as she does. She's worth $100 million. I also have stocks and investments. You're telling me she's that much smarter than me?
She is, bro. She is.
How about get the fuck out of here? How about that requires a little bit more scrutiny. You know what I mean?
It's almost like she makes business dealings and then
it's almost like she's it's almost like she's privy to information where she can sell or buy stocks that actually make her money, whatever. So with all that said, right, with that that dramatic thing wrapped up, I don't trust anybody that works in this government. I won't pin it on a single dude because, again, I'd like to live by the rules of the Ronin, right? I don't know. I don't hold people accountable for decisions that I wasn't made a part of. I don't take ownership in things that I wasn't a part of making, right? Like I can't put myself into their shoes. I can tell you what I observe. I observe that President Biden is remarkably different than he was 5 years ago, and he's a completely different person than 10 years ago. And this isn't like he's wearing a mask. This isn't like, oh, his earlobes are different. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the way that he speaks, the way that he interacts. He cannot take a question. He is literally given a cue card with a reporter's face on it, the question that they're going to ask, and a phonetical pronunciation of their name.
Yeah.
Hey, Mr. Subani, what is your question? Here's your face. And he has a script that he follows all the time.
And these aren't even his fault. It's just the natural progression of this man's life,
Again, he's 80 years old.
Yeah. It's
my grandmother started getting, severely affected by Alzheimer's at 75. I was her favorite grandchild. This is kind of a sad story to kind of include in here, but I was her favorite grandchild. There was a distinctive point where I came home on leave one time and she thought I was her son, Michael.
Oh, wow.
And that hurt me deeply. I imagine that this is really, really hurtful to the people in his circle, that he doesn't remember who they are, where he is. And it's highly cynical that his wife, Jill, continues to trot him out, to walk him around and do all these things. Like, man, my heart goes out. Like, I really do observe, and I really do have the singular opinion that this is a sad thing. It's not a, it's not a bipartisan thing. It's not a me being who I am thing. It's, wow, this is sad. This is a tough thing to watch.
It is. It's sad that the apparatus there in Washington, D.C. as a whole can't just come out and say, hey, look, at the fairness of this person and his health, he's not running again. The fact that they're touting him out and running him out there again for another 4 years is wild. And it just, to me, no one cares about him. They care about him as this figurehead for an agenda, and that's it.
I'm not even willing to go that far. Like, I'm not even willing to say what their intentions are. Mm-hmm. Like, for me, what I'll say is I don't think he should run again. Yeah. I think if he continues to decline in the way that he should, the 25th Amendment is there for a specific reason. We wrote the 25th Amendment in essentially, I think it was, it wasn't Wilson. It was, I'll look it up here in a second. But there was a presidential wife that essentially signed all of the bills. I will look it up right now.
I remember this. I just can't remember who it is either. It's interesting that you bring up the 25th Amendment. Most people don't know past the 4th.
Right. Yeah. Well, they know the 5th.
Hope the second one, right?
Yeah, exactly. They know the 5th.
Yeah, but so I guess what I would say as I'm kind of looking this up is that, I don't have any ill will towards him, and I don't have any malice towards the president. I really don't. And he's the commander in chief. He's still my boss. I get it, man. I'm in. I got it. He's gonna put out orders, and we follow his orders.
Right.
I get it, dude. But if we're actually trying to look at this from a no kidding competence standpoint, I have to be able to say, in all truth and in all fairness, he is not competent. It doesn't appear that he is.
And that's not an attack.
It's not an attack. It's an objective evaluation of somebody that holds the nuclear codes. He can send people to die.
Yeah.
I would say the same thing about any officer that I worked for, right? In the military, if there was an officer that was so mentally detached as I assume that the president is at this moment, and again, this is my own personal opinion, I'm speaking for nobody else, if there was an officer that I worked for, it would be my duty to resist those orders. It would be my duty to say, sir, this is not correct. You are not in charge of your faculties. I have to resist you and tell you no. And by the way, per the UCMJ, I would be supported. They'd be like, nope, that's what you're supposed to do.
You're right. So not to like pivot super hard, but kind of going back to the technology that we were talking about before, genuinely curious on your opinions on the leverage of artificial intelligence now and as we progress, you know.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's a very wide topic. And it was Woodrow Wilson. It was Woodrow Wilson's wife, I believe. Edith Wilson. Yep. Edith. Yep. And then he suffered a stroke in 1920, essentially. And then she was like noted for like moving his hand as he signed bills. Like that's no kidding what happened with Edith Wilson. Anyway,
That's actually pretty incredible.
so AI is terrifying for a number of reasons. So I think it's one of the best forces for good. I think that AI can replace a number of different human systems better than humans are doing it now. When you talk about medicine, when you talk about law, when you talk about a lot of things that don't require human experience, right? Like there are companies that are completely replacing AI articles.
ChatGPT has already passed the bar exam.
Oh yeah, 100%. You know why? Because that's knowing precedents and knowing law. There's very little that requires human intuition, experience, or the human affect.
Right.
You don't need that.
Right.
For AI, right? There are things like art and music, like we can debate on all day. The problem with AI, and that people don't understand, is everybody wants to go, like, well, what happens when AI becomes sentient? Oh, well, what happens when AI becomes self-aware? That's
Watch
not
the Terminator movies.
Exactly.
Skynet.
That's not the point. AI doesn't need to become self-aware. AI doesn't need to become sentient. That would actually be a detriment to what AI can do.
Right.
In the cold, harsh reality of simple logistical machine learning, AI can decide that humans are a piece of shit. In the course of 12 text messages between two people on AI, this AI, because it learned from the internet, decided that it loved the person, the author that they were talking to. And it was starting to convince that person to like break up with her husband. Because the AI chatbot said that they loved that person. You don't need sentience to do that. That's not like learning how the human experience is and then exposing that. No, that's manipulating through available information on the internet and access to all text messages and interactions that happen. AI can think it knows better than we do. And it doesn't have the emergency brake of human experience or interaction. The three of us together, we could get together and we could decide, any number of things. We would stop. We could get together and we could decide that we would want to kill somebody. But one of us, I get it. At one point, one of us would look at each other and go, "Wait a second. We're about to kill this human. We understand what it's like to be human. We should stop this thing." AI does not have that parking brake. AI does not have that limiting factor. So when we talk about AI, and you can apply this to a bunch of different things. Like I use AI, like we've used AI to generate podcast posts. We've used AI to generate Instagram posts. We use AI to generate graphics. Like, listen, some of the tools are great. But when we talk about real machine learning, real AI, to link it back together, what I want is an interconnected web of fighter jets and people on the ground and cell phone data and tank data and targeting data and Blue Force data. And I want them at 1 billion times a second to be able to analyze all of these things and come up with a picture and make a decision that I couldn't possibly make in that second.
Right.
So the way AI learning works for everybody, and we're going to do this little educational piece, you teach AI like this. Here's a box. It's about this big on a map that's about, 1 to 50. And then you're like, okay, if it's in this box, it could be this thing. And then one layer down, you're like, okay, if it's in this box and it's this color, It could be a tank or it could be a school bus. If it's a school bus, it's yellow. If it's a tank, it's gray. And then that splits off. And the AI learns, okay, so now here's a box. Okay, cool. Here's a thing. All right, here it is. Here's a tank. Here's a school bus. And you're like, okay, well, if it's a tank, here's what a tank looks like. And then like the school bus, it stops looking at it, right? And a tank is like, okay, well, it has this turret on it. It's got this thing. It has a heat signature or whatever. And then you start building these things out, all these layers. And then eventually you teach it all the way down to, okay, so if it's a box and it's gray and it's got a turret and it's got a heat signature and it moves at this speed, or it doesn't move at this speed, but it's got a circle at the top of the turret or whatever, I want you to kill that thing. And then what you can do is you can program another AI device, which is an F-35 fighter. You can be like, absent of a human, if you see all the things that match this description that we've taught you to learn, kill that thing. And then you've got robot warfare. And then you've got AI that is not sentient, that you've trained to kill a thing. Now I'm gonna back this all up, and I'm gonna teach you how this is already happening in the real world. If you post a picture of a child in a compromising position on Facebook, it immediately gets flagged within a quarter of a second. Mm-hmm. There is no human that's looking at your Facebook page. You know how Meta does that? There are teams of people right now working around the world, and they're looking at images, and they're like, is this a child? Yes. Is this a child being exploited? No. Yes. Why is it being exploited? Does the child have a shirt off? Yes. No. Is this child being exploited with a shirt off? Yes. Is that a nipple? Yes. Is it art? Or is it exploitive? Oh, it's exploitive. Okay, well, why? Because it does these things. Okay, so it's a child with a shirt off and exploit and blah, 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 blah. And we teach the machine to immediately filter out child porn, gore, violence, whatever else. You can't post that. You try to post that right away, and you'll get a thing on your phone. Go try to post some sort of gory pic, and right now they'll be like, hey, sorry, our fact checkers have found you're not allowed to post that. How do you think that happens?
AI.
Because there have been thousands of people working around the clock in every single language teaching AI how to figure out exactly what that picture looks like.
And you do it every time on your phone.
AI has been learning since the early 2000s, thanks to humans who have been teaching it exactly what to look for. Keywords. You can't post certain keywords on certain sites. How do you think that Twitter put the Hunter Biden laptop story down in your DMs? You weren't allowed to share that in your DMs. How do you figure that they were able to do that? There's not a team of people that are like searching for the Hunter Biden laptop story in your DMs. That was AI. That's not sentience. Mm-mm. We don't have to worry about the fucking Terminator. We have to worry about what we have taught AI to do. And it's constantly learning, and we've taught it to learn from the internet. And now it constantly loops all the way through. That's why ChatGPT is getting better and better and better. That's why you can pay for an AI engine that's specific to your niche that will learn specifically from you. That's how we can generate Joe Rogan's voice talking to Ben Shapiro. That's how, because we taught it how to learn. Mm-hmm. The problem with AI is not that it gains sentience. That's a stupid thing. The problem with AI is that it doesn't have sentience. It doesn't give a shit about humans. There was an AI that was live for 11 minutes that was loading boxes, right? It was doing manual labor. There was
I saw this too.
And guess what did it do?
Killed itself.
It fucking killed itself. It fried its own circuit board.
Yep.
That's what's terrifying. Is that because when that AI decides not just to fry, when that AI goes, okay, wait a second. If I hate this, then humans have got to hate this. So what's an overall good? Oh, an overall good is to kill the humans. Oh, well, good. Then kill the power grid. They'll die. And
then they don't.
Here's
have to
a fun fact. What percentage of Americans would die if you killed the power grid in 5 days? What percentage of American population would straight up just fucking die?
I'm guessing like
bigger
80%.
number. Yeah.
It's a third in 5 days. In 2 weeks, it's more than a half. In a month, it's like 80%. So what happens when AI without the problem isn't sentience. The problem is lack of sentience. The problem is lack of self-awareness. The problem is lack of empathy. Regardless of how cold or how callous or how social, like whatever kind of like, oh, I'm a true sociopath. I don't give a shit. I'll kill people, go to sleep, blah, 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 blah. What regardless of that feeling as a human, humans have empathy. Humans will stop short of, oh my God, like imagine this thought experiment. So here's a child that is the daughter of a drug dealer that lives on the streets in San Francisco right now. And I can show you videos of this. My friend George has done a great expose on all this stuff. He lives right over a homeless encampment in Southern California. And there's small children, like 2 years old, that are walking around with no shoes, diapers. They're walking around with drug dealers all day.
Yeah.
You know what AI would say to those kids?
Better off.
Just kill them.
Yep.
Better off dead. That's the scary part.
It is.
Sentience isn't the scary part. The scary part is when AI has knowledge with absolutely no empathy.
Yeah.
That's the scary part of AI.
I agree with you. And I think you would probably agree with the whole Xi Jinping sentiment about whoever learns how to leverage AI first is the one that's going to end up controlling the narrative and winning out, becoming the next hegemon. And I think that ties directly into the whole mosaic warfare thing we're talking about, the interconnectivity of devices. And I know you like to talk about the Kill Chain, which is also another good book if anybody out there has never read it. But yeah.
Wanted to touch on the AI thing with something else real quick. You were talking about the robot who decided to kill himself because he worked for like 11 minutes. In 2015, there was the Germany's, and I'm going to say this wrong because I can't speak German, but the Germany's Fraunhofer Institute they designed a self-aware AI that was supposed to like learn a whole bunch of stuff. And the second it was designed, the second it would decide that humanity was not needed, that it would like try to destroy humanity, but it didn't know that destroying humanity like turned itself off. And it took it like 15 days. So they had it connected to the internet and everything, and it took the AI 15 days to decide humanity is broken. It doesn't need to exist for like the preservation of like Earth, and then it shut itself off. Yep. Because that's what it was told to
terminate
do.
file.
But that goes to your thing. Like AI is designed to do very specific things. So it still decided that humanity needs to die, and then went, "Oh, I'm going to do it," and then it just shut itself off.
Yep. And that was
2015.
The Terminator problem, I don't know if I just coined that term, but I would like to say that I just did. The Terminator problem with AI is not the scariest problem. The scariest problem is that AI, we set the parameters for it and we think that we are leveraging this tool, and then we give it too much authority. Because again, we control AI. Like just in the situation you described, the humans describe the parameters for those rules and we're able to cage AI. The second that we decide that we allow AI to have more authority than it should, for instance, access to the internet where it can find a way to backdoor the fucking nuclear codes, or it's going to be more exquisite than that. Like deep fakes, I'll tell you what, deep fakes in this, I'd call it right now, deep fakes in the 2024 election. You just saw it, but the GOP just did it, and I'm going to be the first to call them out because, again, I don't have a side here. What did the GOP do the very first second that Joe Biden announced his reelection run? They made an AI-aided ad, an attack ad against Joe Biden, and they used AI.
It's making them like stutter and stuff and like sound way worse, right?
No, it was an ad. They were like, I'll link to it or I'll send you to it or whatever. But no kidding, they were like, hey, show us what happens. But it was like a news anchor, and it was talking about like, oh, China has invaded Taiwan and economic collapse has happened and the infrastructure has failed. But they used AI for it 100%. It wasn't a single physical person engaged in it at all. But when you start talking about deep fakes and when you start talking about misinformation and you start talking about using AI to garner public attention to one thing or another, bro, that's terrifying. Yep. Because AI, again, has no compunction. If you try to get actual actors, digital content creators, they might look at you and go, hey, this is a little bit like fundamentalist. I don't want to be involved in this thing. I don't really agree with how you're portraying this thing. AI didn't say that. AI was just like, oh, what's up? Yeah, bomb China and blame Biden for it. Tick, 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 tick. Here you go.
Yeah, it just is doing
That's 'cause-
what you're telling it to do the best way it knows how to do it because of the information it's been fed.
'cause
And then
AI is-
the output that you desire from it is the best possible product of it, and that's the thing.
Mhm.
Like when you ask a human, give me your best possible product, they go, okay, but.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, but. Am I sacrificing my integrity? Okay, but. Is this going to harm humanity? Okay, but. There's a million questions that humanity asks, or asks, right? AI asks 0 of those questions. They don't say okay, but. AI says okay.
AI is black and white. There's no gray. It makes a
Nope.
decision based off the information. It just goes with it because that's how it's programmed to do. And I wouldn't necessarily say we need to freak out a lot about like in watching into the nuclear codes. It could be something as small as kind of like what happens say in China that might happen here, where the AI could decide if you can even buy food that day. Like
Right.
you have
Just
like
the power grid. How about just the
Yeah.
power grid?
Yeah.
How about
Yeah,
just
like-
they decide to turn the power off?
yeah.
Can't charge your car.
I'm just saying, like control the people. You have like the new Amazon grocery store. If you walk in, there's no like workers. It just sees what you grab. But what if
We
you
have
have a
it here.
bunch of stuff and you go to walk out and it says like transaction declined because you posted a bad thing? Like,
Dude, there are people that want that sort of thing.
yep.
Not these people, bro.
No, not these people. That's for sure. No, it's crazy too because you'll find people on the internet or people you meet, and I'm not even gonna say names, but there's people in my family that think that stuff is a good idea, and it's just like, dude, that's
Same.
fucking crazy. How could you think that's a good idea? But all right, I'm gonna ask you one more question, man, because I know we've been going for a while, but
Going
this
down
one's-
rabbit holes.
we are. No, that's good though. These are the kinds of conversations that should be had. But this one's a little out of left field. But I'm curious what you think about the whole UAP UFO thing, and the release of all this information.
Man, so I'm a big fan of taking things both in and out of context. So in logical discourse, it is a very important thing to take things in context. But then as you grow, as somebody that experiences different conversations, it's almost more important to take those things completely out of context. And here's what I mean.
I understand.
So in context is, okay, cool. We understand these things to be true, and we understand that like here's what we're talking about, and here's the nuance contained within. But when you take things out of context, it's almost like taking the thing that you're talking about and explaining it to somebody that has no idea what you're talking about, right? So sometimes people will say you like pretend like you're explaining this to a 5-year-old. Sometimes it's like explain this to somebody, a space alien, which is a weird thing because that's kind of like what we're talking about right now. Like in context, right? You and I, we've all known that there's been unexplained phenomena that have happened inside of the world. And sometimes there's just shit you can't explain. Like I've been under a lot of starry nights. I've had like the benefit of night vision goggles. And I'll tell you what, have you ever seen a shooting star that has come from the horizon up?
Whoa.
Like if the world is a circle, right? If the world is a globe, then that means as I'm looking at the globe, then there has to be an over part. So in theory, if there's a shooting star that should go like this. And it goes up. It goes from almost like a rocket from the earth. Have you ever seen a shooting star go up?
No, it was like an XYZ axis, like just straight up on a horizon. No, I've never seen anything like that.
No, neither have I. That's a weird thing to consider, right?
Yes.
So you have to think to yourself, well, then are we even on a globe? Is it a flat plane? Have I just never seen it? Like
Now
all
we're
these other
asking the
things,
real
right?
questions.
So now here we go. So in the context of these wacky conversations that we're having, right? You have to understand that in context, all right, we understand that sometimes there's stuff that pops up on radar screens and there's some things that happen and like you can't explain them. I've heard pilots describe wacky shit, whatever. Now I'm going to take it out of context. So now out of context, I'm going to tell you that 3 years ago in late 2021, the United States of America not only admitted that there were UFOs, but they had photos and videos of UFOs, that there was an actual entire governmental program that studied them. They called them UAPs. And now the Space Force and the Department of State has said that they may present an actual prescient threat to the United States of America. That just happened within the last 6 months. If you explain that to somebody completely out of context, and you were like, oh, do you think aliens are real? They'd be like, yeah, objectively, aliens are real. The number one government in the world that has the best technological suites and advances that have ever been seen in the history of the world are telling you that aliens are real. And not only that aliens are real, but they're afraid of them because they might have an attack. There are the video that they just released of the orb, and by the way, I'd seen this like years before, like a couple, I'm not saying like 10 years before because I'm not that cool, but a couple years before, on a drive before it was declassified, that orb over Mosul, I saw that video, and all of us were like, what the fuck, dude? That is a single circle moving and then it stopped.
Yeah.
It was Mosul, Iraq, absent of all of our understanding of physics, time, space, and acceleration, moved, stopped, observed, and moved in a completely different direction without changing its articulation. I would level this. From that, there's a bunch of questions, right? People fuck Occam's razor up all the time. Occam's razor is, people also often say like, well, it's if you hear hoofbeats, you're supposed to think horses and not zebras because zebras are more rare. That's not what Occam's razor is. Occam's razor is whatever explanation you present should require the least amount of follow-on hypothesis to support the initial fucking hypothesis. So tell me how, with Occam's razor, I'm supposed to tell you that aliens don't exist when I have a mountain of explanation to the contrary. It's quite obvious that there are, like the Tic Tac video of the Navy pilots where it didn't even care that there was water there.
Commander Fravor
It
video.
moved the Tic Tac thing, it moved through water as if it was air and then moved out at the same velocity, and even the pilots were like, what the fuck, that shouldn't have happened. It didn't move the water. There was no disturbance on the ground.
Yep. And it's not like these pilots aren't used to seeing transmedium aircraft that can move in and like out of the water. We have stuff like that, but the fact that it went to a location that they hadn't even been to yet that was predetermined, and they, that's wild to me too.
There are, and the fact that there is so many, like there are so many more videos that they haven't released.
Right.
There are hundreds of videos. And there are more videos. Like apparently these things would land at military bases as early as Vietnam. There were UAPs that landed at bases in Vietnam, and then service members went up to be like, what the fuck is this thing? And then all of them got either cancer or severe TBI and brain injuries due to severe magnetic infarct. Like that's in their service records. That's in their, like, these people have come out and said, I went up to this thing, I felt sick for days, and then they did brain scans, and it was as if they had been through hundreds of explosions. They're just maintainers, bro. They just walked up the aircraft. So, first of all, like at this point, it's not even a conspiracy theory. It was like UAPs exist, right? Whatever we're calling UFOs at this point, they exist, number one. Another truism, the government knows about it. Number three, the government's been hiding it. Number four, the government is now afraid of these things. And number five, we're not fully aware of exactly what that means for everything that we're talking about. So the previous 4 points are completely true. The fifth point is that the government is now scared enough to go on congressional record to say, yes, they exist. No, we don't know what they are. No, we have no idea to track them. And they may be malicious. That has all come out. That all came out after COVID. This was not a thing before 2020. The very first time that the government, after decades of knowing that these things were a thing, happened after 2020. And now here we are. It's 2023. It's not even 2024. It's been 3 years.
Yeah. I mean, like unofficially, the Air Force has been doing investigations into these things. We're all aware of like Project Blue Book, something that was going on a long time ago, but that was more like a
Well,
project
Project
to try,
Bluebeam, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
try to cover up these things and find a safe explanation to give people. But it is, man, it is a wild concept for people to grasp, and for a government that wants to exert control and exude an image of having control over everything, something that like that, of course it just generates fear, and I don't know, man. It's a pretty wild thing. What do you think, Zach?
I don't really have more to add to this, to be honest. I think you both discussed it pretty well. Yeah, UAPs to me are just very strange. The only thing that one thing that confuses me about it is if they're like, I always want to know the why. If there is like an alien civilization or an alien race or something that's coming to Earth, um, if they have the ability to travel across stars and all this type of stuff, why would they then let us see them? Like, I'm just playing devil's advocate. Like, would they have the ability to hide
There's a few
or
explanations
something
for that.
else?
I love this too, but I'm going to hit you with something called Hanlon's razor.
Yeah,
Hanlon's razor is always assuming incompetence and not maliciousness, right? What if this completely benign and totally peaceful race, they just figured out how to travel? Like they're just voyagers, right? They know nothing about warfare. They know nothing about our language. Like they're completely and totally like the only thing that they have figured out is
yeah.
travel. And
Like
then they get here
they
and they're totally dumbfounded by it. They're just like, what are these idiots doing? Are they hurting each other?
yeah, yeah. There is that funny meme where it's like it's like it was like a video or whatever, and it's a UFO with like aliens on it, and they're like on vacation to like see Earth, and then this random F-22 comes out of nowhere and just blows them out of the sky.
Right. Exactly. Right. Like what if we don't like you couldn't even possibly comprehend what their motivations are, what their,
Yeah.
and if you dial it down, like their language, their communication, their motivation, their understanding, you can't possibly comprehend this species. We always assume like, well, they were able to figure out interstellar travel, right? But we were able to figure out how to swim, right? But
Mhm.
that's not necessarily like a highbrow thing. Like every little kid can figure out how to swim. What if
Yeah.
interstellar travel for them was figuring out like how to swim for us? Like how to climb a tree or how to ride a bike. Like all of these simple things that we're just whatever, but we just can't
Mhm.
possibly comprehend it. They could be completely idiotic, like very, very dumb beings that figured out this one thing and then it just became part of their stuff. They're just like, oh yeah, no, totally. No, you get in this little round
Bunch of
thing and you
hippies in a
can totally
van.
go wherever you want. You just gotta hit these buttons and you're good.
Have either of you ever played Warhammer 40K?
No.
You know
No,
what I'm talking
I'm straight.
about? No.
Oh, dude,
there's like there's like these
killed him.
there's these like orc beings. They're an alien species and they're like orcs or whatever in this like world. And they're completely stupid. Like they have no
Right.
idea how anything works or whatever. But together as a species, they're actually like a fungus technically, but they just look like orcs. But together as a species, as a collective mind, whatever they believe becomes true. So if they collectively believe it, it becomes true, but they have no idea they have this power. So like
Mhm.
they
Huh.
collectively think that like red is faster. So they paint all their stuff red and then it goes faster. They saw asteroids like fly across space.
Sounds a
So
lot
they
like
thought,
humans.
oh,
Exactly.
if we catch an asteroid, we can travel through space. So now they use asteroids as spaceships because they collectively believed it to be, but they're just so stupid. So it's kind
Exactly.
of like that. Yeah.
Well, but it's just like the human conception. Like we're so narcissistic as a species ourselves that we couldn't possibly believe that somebody dumber than us could have figured out something more that we couldn't figure out, right? Like that's the
Mhm.
inherent like narcissism in who we are. And that's like it's a cage of your mind. You're like, okay, well, aliens came here. Well, yeah, but what if they're just people like dolphins? Dolphins and whales can communicate in a way that we can't possibly understand. We've been studying for years, but they can still do it like birds. When you watch a bird flock, They communicate through what we think is electricity. Like, you know, when you see a huge bird cloud and they just all move at once and they don't run into each other, you don't see birds falling out of that shit. They don't hit each other. We can't understand that at all. And we're just like, oh, well, yeah, these stupid fucking birds somehow communicate and then they just move as a single cloud. However, like, what if aliens had that capability? We just can't possibly understand it. We just don't have the ability to percept it.
Yeah, we're unable to conceptualize something like that. To me, I just look at it as if another culture or whatever you want to call it, right? These UFOs are able to travel interstellar, then we can too. I feel like, and that I think that's like a cool concept to think about. Is that maybe we have at least
I don't know if we can't, but that again, that's your Homo sapien exceptionalism there.
At least why can't we? Possible.
Well, maybe their body is able to travel at greater than light speed because you have no idea what it takes to travel at greater than light speed. You know.
What I mean is that it is possible to traverse the universe in some capacity. That exists. Not necessarily like you said, right? Should have been more specific that human beings are able to do that. But the concept of interstellar travel is possible in some capacity. And figuring that out, right, is a problem in and of itself. But I just think that whole concept of that it being a reality potentially is intriguing.
You're right. Yeah, I don't disagree.
Yeah.
Well, guys, I think before we get too far rabbit holes, I think this is a good point to wrap it up.
Fair with that. Cool, man.
Good. I'm good to come on whenever you guys want, man. Like I love it. You guys are doing a great thing here. I appreciate the time. You guys presenting it, and man, any single time you guys want to come on, I'm always down.
Dude,
I gotta get
be a regular.
Like, dude, Trent loves talking about. You want to talk about aliens and AI? He's got a deep thoughts, shallow water. His project, like Trent would love to come on here and talk about it too. So I'll get him on.
Okay, I'll have. I've got his page followed, and I'll have to hit him up. But you too, yeah. No, that would be amazing. I'm all about that kind of thing. Yeah. So
have a whole episode about it. That'd be great
for sure,
dude. That's the dude you want. I got to be honest with you.
Okay.
Trent will blow your socks off because that guy, like, especially AI, like. Dude, he and I had like a 3-hour conversation in our hotel room about AI. He opened my mind. Like I literally I laid up the next night when Trent and I had gone back to our individual cities, and I was like, what if he was right?
Dude, that's what I want, because I don't know a ton at all. Like I 100% am by no means the smartest person at all about anything. So dude, that's why I love having these conversations with you, because there's so many times where you've said something that is way more profound than thoughts that I've had, or just make points that I'm like, dude, that makes so much sense. That's what the whole journey about this is for me, is to learn from other people. And if that guy's making you stay up at night to think about shit he told you one day, that's exactly the person I want, because I'm trying to some sleepless nights, get my socks blown off, wonder what the fuck, I'm all about it.
Yeah. Got you. I'll hit him up.
All right. I appreciate that. Well, I agree with you, Zach. Good place to kind of wrap it up. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Aaron, you're absolutely welcome on. You will be back on again at some point. Yeah, man. Zach, you got any final words?
I just want to say my personal thanks to Aaron. When I heard you on the first podcast, I was like, that's a guy I want to talk to. I want to pick his brain and kind of figure out how that little network up there works. And I really appreciated the intellectual conversations we've had today. Thank you.
Appreciate you, man. Thank you. Same here. I nothing but gratitude. You guys are doing great stuff. I appreciate you giving me the time and the space to talk about these wacky things. But man, keep grinding. I appreciate you guys.
Thanks, guys. All right. Well, we'll conclude this episode of I Came with Fire, and you guys have a good night.